passion in like arts and like whatever you consider serious work together. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Do you still think photography can be a career or job? Or?
Well, I'm open to the idea. But like, I guess one part about growing up, because I'm sure a lot of you guys know, but going through high school is quite a changing experience. But one part of growing up was understanding that nothing was quite as easy as you might have initially thought it was. Because I always consider myself pretty good at photography, so I just kind of assumed it'd be like an easy walk in the park, and if I just kept doing what I kept doing, eventually I would get to where I wanted to be. But then, so right now I'm a little bit more realistic about it, about how like there's thousands and thousands of art graduates every year, but there's only so many jobs for them. But if like one day like the opportunity comes up where I can, you know, maybe switch careers, and maybe if I decide I still like photography more than whatever I'm doing at the time, I'll be open to the idea of like changing. Yeah.
You mentioned you started to become serious about getting into a good school at the end of sophomore.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of your classmates also thought that way as well,
yeah.
Right? But of course you are now able to get into U of Chicago, a very good school. What do you think that sets you apart from your classmates?
Well, I was planning to talk about that, but the long story short was, essentially for me, in a very short amount of time, I found a really strong appreciation for really working hard. Because as a child, I was tutored a lot by my grandparents in math. And so I went through like the first couple years of elementary school being like a couple of years ahead of the other kids, especially in math and history. And so I developed these bad study habits, and that's initially like it became like an Achilles heel to me. Like it pulled me back like over the long term because I never really learned to work hard. But then I think so with me, I have like an interesting philosophy of like what colleges look for in terms of like students, and then so I'll talk a little bit about that in the presentation. Yeah.
Do we miss anything important?
I don't think so. I was just like answering a couple questions. Yeah, I haven't started yet.
哦，谢谢，好，就那里有位置，前面还有一个位置，那里也有一个位置。那两个还剩，就正好还有4个位置，这两个可以在这里和这里。
Yeah. Oh, really? Well, for me, the camera that I recommend right now is not really on topic, but I think the best value is you can buy, it's a camera called the Nikon D90. I think it's 2 generations old now, but I consider it probably the best value camera you can buy. Because D90, yeah. I shot with it 2 years ago, and the reason why I say it's good is because it's new enough that like the image quality is still very like considerably good. And then if you were to choose between buying like a camera that is like newer but lower in like in terms of like the feature level, you start to hit walls in terms of like what you can creatively do with the camera. So there's 2 things about the D90 that make it like I think good for learning. Is that first, it's really cheap. You can buy them used for around $300 to $400 online, and then, so it's like a good starter camera. And then 2, it has what's called a motor drive, which is it means it can drive older lenses, whereas the newer cameras can't. And then 3rd, you can do creative things with flash, whereas older cameras you have to buy additional things in order to do that. Yeah. All right, so I can. Can I begin? Okay. All right. Okay, so okay, there's quite a few of you guys. So my name is Frank. I assume most of you already know that, but I was asked by Sherry to come here and talk a little bit about my experiences through high school and my experiences with the college admissions process, because I'm sure like that's something that's all been on your minds for like a very long time. And so a little bit about me, especially in context of college. Last year I was accepted to early action to the University of Chicago. It was my top choice school, and it was the only school I had picked that was on the top 10 list of US News. And so like essentially today I'm just going to be talking about first my experiences with the application itself. I have some opinions on what the colleges are looking for in terms of like different characteristics of prospective students, and then just like some personal anecdotes and like maybe some advice for all of you guys when you guys as you guys go through high school or when you guys start to go through high school. Oops. Okay, it's not working. Okay, there we go. Okay. So essentially I'm going to be covering 3 main topics. The first is what colleges look for, or at least what I think colleges look for, because what I'm going to talk about is nobody really knows what colleges really want. I don't even think the colleges really know what they really want. And then so a little bit about like the characteristics and students they'll be looking at in particular. And then the second thing I'm going to be talking about is my personal profile, so what my application looks like. And then like the different extracurriculars and activities that I did that might fit into like this template of what colleges look for. And then the last thing is just I'm going to talk a little bit about like advice for people who are going to college or like going to high school or that are already in high school and starting to look at applying to different colleges. So with that, I'm going to start with actually just kidding. I'm going to do a little bit of introduction. So most of you are probably here to listen to like ideas or different tips, or like maybe you think like have me suggest to you different like summer programs that might be interesting to your kids. Some of you might be like looking for like shortcuts into getting in college. I don't know if that characterizes everyone here, but essentially I have a little bit of a different approach, and it's that essentially what colleges are going to be looking for it's primarily about your character. And I'll talk about why that is. It's more about like what attitudes you have towards learning, what sort of attitudes you have towards like in terms of your work ethic, in terms of your like integrity as a student, and it's more about those sort of things than your intrinsic skill right now. So it doesn't matter quite as much that you are like very, very good at programming Java for your age. Like that's important because it tells you about your characteristics in terms of like your attitudes towards learning. But the fact that you're good at learning Java right now doesn't actually matter as much as you might think it does. And so with that in mind, I'm going to start by talking about what colleges look for. So the answer is I don't really know. So to explain that, typically there's a lot of rumors going around. Like for example here, I think there was a rumor going around this year that colleges are really looking for things like art supplements or like music supplements. They like people who know how to write good essays and things like that. But in reality, the thing is that nobody really knows why they got into college or why they didn't get into a college. So the best that we can do is guess. And so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about what my guesses are. And like, it might not exactly answer all of your questions because I'm going to be talking about it from a very, very broad point of view. It's more to guide your personal philosophies as opposed to like telling you exactly like what you need to do to get in college. Because the honest truth is I can't really guarantee that any of you are going to get into college. It's very likely that most of you are going to go to a college, but like the probability that you get into any specific college or any specific program gets better depending on you as an applicant. But like everyone knows, you're not guaranteed admission to Harvard unless I don't know, maybe you're the son of Bill Gates or something. But so my personal philosophy is this: that colleges are more interested in character than in skills. Okay, so this is pretty important. So, like for example, I talked a little bit earlier about this rumor that that colleges recently have been looking for things like art supplements, and so like this is one example of a specific thing that you guys might be looking for in terms of like, oh, I should do more music in order because that will improve my odds of getting to a good college. But and so even though I'm a person who really believes in this. This current trend, like colleges are probably looking more for like art supplements and music supplements than before, because I have a lot of friends who are all very talented musicians or very talented artists or very good writers who did get into very, very good schools. There's also those people out there who are good writers or good musicians and good artists who didn't get into these schools. So like in terms of like these specifics, it's hard for me to really tell you, yes, colleges are looking for artists or colleges are looking for musicians right now. But so the truth is, what I think is that admissions offices are much more arbitrary than you might expect. So there's no rubric. So you won't find like a sheet where you might get 60 points for being a musician and 70 points for like having a good GPA or like 90 points for getting an SAT. For me, my impression of college admissions is that a lot of times the admissions officers are just guessing. So they're looking at everything as a whole. Have you guys heard of holistic evaluation? He's applying to colleges. I'm assuming you're getting close, or you're applying to colleges as well. So holistic evaluation is what colleges call the process where they look at you as a whole. So there's no minimum GPA, there's no minimum SAT. They consider your extracurriculars, they consider everything you do, your essays, etc., etc. And so they look at you as a whole. And then so it seems that like a lot of people tend not to believe that colleges do a very, very holistic review. And I'm inclined not to believe the critics, because in reality, I think that colleges are very, very holistic. So essentially what they're doing when they look at your application is they look at your application as a whole. You see, he did these extracurriculars, he has this GPA and SAT score, his essays sounds like a person who would like to do this kind of thing. And at the end of everything, what they're trying to do is they're trying to determine what kind of person you are. It's not that, we need someone, sometimes maybe colleges might be, we need good athletes here, so we'll admit a couple more athletes than normal. We're like, we need more harp players in our symphony, so maybe we'll admit a couple of people who know how to play harp. But in reality, colleges are really trying to get to know who you are. And this sounds really cliche, but I'm inclined to believe, like based on my experiences, that it's very, very true. And so the reality is, unless Harvard and Princeton are like fighting to get you, like this is the reason why I believe holistic review to be the case. If Harvard and Princeton are not like sending you mail already, like saying, like you're so talented, we really want you here right now, then what differences might exist between you and your peers, or your kids and their peers, is actually very, very insignificant. So maybe some kids took calc a year early. Like maybe some kids have 7 APs instead of 6 APs. Or maybe some kids, I don't know, are like a little bit better at basketball than another kid, right? But in reality, in the long stretch of things, these things don't mean that much. Because what these things tell you about yourself is where you are right now, not where you are going. And the reality is you're very, very far from wherever you're going to end up, right? So it's too early to say, because he has a slightly better GPA than that kid, he is going to end up at a better place than that kid. It's too early, it's simply too early. And that sort of makes sense to you guys, right? So essentially, the line that I wrote, this is my own writing, but in 10 years' time, your attitudes towards learning will be a much stronger predictor of where you're going to end up than where you are right now. So does that make sense to you? For those of you who, like, for example, are trying to learn Java, maybe some people learn Java a little bit early than others, right? Maybe some people never learn Java in high school at all. But in the long stretch of things, if someone goes into college knowing a little bit of Java and he majors in CS, versus someone who goes into college majoring in CS who doesn't know any Java at all, in 10 years' time, when you're writing like code on like architectures or working for like Oracle databases, like that small amount of Java knowledge really doesn't make much of a difference. So what I'm here to tell you guys today is essentially that there's like kind of a perspective shift in terms of what I think colleges are looking for, and that's they're looking for your personal characteristics as a person. So whether you're passionate about learning, whether you're honest, whether you have like academic honesty, if you're a good person, okay, if you have like a sense of moral and ethics, whether you're curious and open-minded, things like this. Like these are more important to colleges than these individual skills that you may or may not have acquired over your 4 years in college. And then so when you look at these skills in particular, they're not actually looking for whether you know how to learn Java. It's just that when you know Java, it might say something about your character. So the kid who learns Java is a little bit more likely to love learning than the kid who didn't learn Java. And so all things considered, like all colleges are going to be doing is they're going to be looking at things as a whole and like trying to determine who you are as a person. Okay. So I have a little bit of story to illustrate this. I have a friend named Eric Zhu. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He's heard of him. He's kind of a big deal at Lynbrook because he's one of my friends who I would consider very intelligent. But he's going to Princeton next year. He was admitted early action. And so he was telling me a story. I was having lunch with him the other day, and he told me the story about his visit to Princeton. Okay. And then he and this other fellow, his name is Victor Zhu. They have the same last name. They're not brothers, but they're both incredibly intelligent. They decided to sit in on a philosophy class called Advanced Logic. Okay, and so like logic, it's a little bit self-explanatory. If you get into the mathematics of it, it's kind of like algebra. But then, even though I know Eric and Victor are both very smart, for example, Eric was an Intel semifinalist last year, and Victor was, I don't know the specifics of Victor, but I know he does very well in Amy every year. But essentially, both of them left the 3-hour lecture after 15 minutes because they couldn't understand a thing the professor was talking about. So like granted, this was a graduate level class, right? But it goes to show that in the long stretch of things, there's a long way to go for all of you. So you think you guys know a lot coming out of college, coming out of high school, you know your physics, you know your calculus, but in reality, next year there's going to be like differential equations, next year there's going to be linear algebra, there's going to be, you know, advanced logic. Classes like this where you have no idea, like you don't even know topics like this exist yet. And so this is just essentially to illustrate that where you stand right now doesn't really mean that much in terms of how far you can go. And this is, so essentially, does anyone here trade stocks or anything? Like we all know that stocks are about trends as opposed to like where the price level is right now, right? You want the trend to go up. You want to pick stocks that are going to go to higher places as opposed to stocks that are going to go to lower places, right? So it doesn't matter that Google was worth $900 right now. It matters more that Google has been rising for the last 2 or 3 months or years, right? So what character traits are colleges exactly interested in? This is a really interesting question because, like I mentioned earlier, the specifics are hard to know. It's hard to know whether colleges are interested in arts or sciences or engineering or mathematics or whatever. So instead, I think the best criteria to go off is a very broad one. So the first one that I can think of is your interest in the college. All right, and this is very interesting. This is very interesting because we all know we have a bunch of students fighting to get into the top colleges, right? But from the other perspective, we also know that all the top colleges are trying to get the best students. So it's like a supply and demand thing. And what's very interesting, there was an article that I read a while back. I don't exactly remember where it was, but essentially it talked about how tier 2 schools like maybe NYU, USC, Tufts, schools like this, they're growing in terms of reputation and in quality of education very, very quickly, much faster than the top level schools like Princeton and Harvard. And so even though they're not quite at the Harvard, Princeton level, these tier 2 schools, the trend for them is upwards. And there's a reason for this. The reason the article talked about is essentially we have tier 1 students, right? Tier 1 students who go to tier 1 schools, tier 2 students who go to tier 2 schools. But in the last 10 or 20 years, the number of tier 1 students has gone up extremely quickly. Because we see a new obsession in our culture about getting to the top colleges, pressuring your kids to become like the best, like going to the, you know, the academic elite, right? So because of this pressure, this is a pressure that's carried both by the students and by the parents. We suddenly see a lot of new tier 1 students, but not that many new tier 1 spots for them. So what do these tier 1 students who don't get to go into tier 1 schools go to? They go to the tier 2 schools, right? So suddenly in the last 5 or 6 years, the amount of tier 1 students in tier 2 schools has gone up. And so what this causes is a lot of tier 2 schools are much, much better than they used to be. And so this creates an environment where colleges are essentially competing with each other to get the best schools because even though there's a lot of talented students, suddenly there's also a lot of very, very good schools. And so like a student who happens to be very, very good at like I don't know if you guys have heard of Johnny Ho. For example, Johnny Ho, right? Like he went to Harvard, but and he won the IOI like coding Olympiad last year, I think. And so even though Johnny Ho did go to Harvard, you never know when a student like this might decide to go to a high tier 2 school just because of something such as like the weather or like the environment around them. So suddenly schools are very competitive. They want students who want to go to them. They want to raise their rankings in terms of like when you look at US News, when you look at like the Forbes college reports, they're really fighting to have more reasons for you to go to them because in the long stretch of things, your students are a very, very big part of the quality of your education, right? So the first thing I think colleges look for a lot recently is that you are interested in them. And I say this because for me personally, I'll tell the story about my academic life in a little bit. But I was not expecting to go to a high-end, like a prestigious college. I was planning on like settling for a school like NYU or like Tufts. Like those were my realistic choices. And then I was very, very surprised when I got the acceptance letter. And well, I mean, now that I think about it, so since Chicago was my only top 10 school, I put a lot of effort into writing my Chicago essays. I tried to make my why do I want to go to Chicago essays unique. And I tried really hard to like get in contact with the regional officers. I went to all of their seminars and I signed in and I asked questions and I sent them emails and stuff like that. So this is one of the reasons maybe I got into college, is that I was very, very interested in UChicago. And I think that's something that colleges are looking a lot for in their students. All right. Am I going too fast? Am I talking too fast for anyone to understand? Just, all right, no, okay, it's okay. All right. So the second thing, and this is the last thing, actually, is your personal interest in learning. Okay, and this one is a little bit vague, but this is essentially based on the fact that I was thinking earlier about how where you are does not matter so much. It matters where you're going, and your interest in learning is what tells colleges where you're going to go. Because it's people who are very, very interested in learning that get to go to very, very high places, right? You want to be the student, for example, who would never even consider cheating. Because, like, what's the point? Like, your goal in school is to learn anyways, right? You want to be the student who participates in class, not because the teacher gives you points for doing it, but because you think the discussion is interesting, right? You want to be the student who reads a lot outside of school, like who goes and reads like more substantial things than maybe just novels. Novels are good, but like reads like classic literature, who reads things on like subjects that aren't taught in school, who I don't know, like subscribes to The Economist, things like this, right? So kids who are actually genuinely interested in learning. All right. So in terms of this, it's really hard to convince someone to be interested in learning. This is an interesting thing. Because essentially when you're interested in learning, it's you care about the subjects that are being taught, right? And it's very, very difficult to inspire someone to care. For me though, the advice that I can offer you is that don't assume that learning sucks. Don't assume that learning is boring, or that it's like uninspiring, or it's like not as fun as going and playing on your computer. Because like a lot of things, what I found is learning gets better with time. So I'll talk a little bit more about this in detail later on. But essentially, like for all of those of you who like, I'm sure like all the kids here played piano when they were a kid. Like, is there anyone who didn't play piano when they were a kid? Or like any kids here? No, like see, look, literally everyone in here has played piano as a kid. And I'm sure almost every single one in here did not like to play piano as a kid. Is there anyone who really liked to play piano as a kid? Oh, see. So does anyone does anyone like to play piano now, just by any chance? See, there's someone inside. There's a couple people over here. Exactly. So what's really interesting, like the piano was an analogy I was going to make a little bit later, so I'm not going to be able to use that later. But like a lot of things, learning is something that seems very uninteresting when you first get into it. Like when you're only ankle deep inside learning, it seems very like uninteresting when you're just learning like addition tables or multiplication tables. But with time, as you find more depth, you'll realize that it's very, very interesting. For me, I suddenly realized that calculus was an amazing idea. Like Newton, like wow, like how did he come up with it? Like limits as like x goes to 0 seems just like really, really incredible. And so as you get more into learning, it's very important that you keep your mind open, because if you do, you may get to the point where you become the intellectual who is curious, like the kind of person colleges really like. And so I don't know if anyone here like hates learning, or if there's anyone here who actually like really, really loves to learn, and who like always fights for the opportunity to speak in Socratic seminars and class and stuff. But it's really important that like you keep an open mind in terms of learning, because in my personal experience, I was a person who hated learning before, and who gradually learned that there's much more to it than I initially expected. All right, so okay, so that ends the section where I talk about what colleges are interested in. Is there any questions right now about like what I think? You can ask specific questions that I didn't talk about at all. That's okay. No? Oh yeah.
So what's your choice? Why do you pick Chicago?
Well, so that's interesting. So I picked Chicago for two reasons. First, it was like one of the good colleges that I had a good chance of getting into, because I don't know if you guys have heard, but University of Chicago has a very quirky admissions process in terms of like, they're not like elitists who only care about your GPA or SAT. They put a lot of weight on things like essays and stuff like that. So if I could differentiate myself there, I felt I had a better chance of getting into Chicago than into like Columbia, for example, right? Chicago and Stanford are the two schools that are considered quirky in terms of like the top 10 schools in the United States. I know a lot of like writing kids got into Stanford this year. Like two come to mind specifically. You guys probably don't know them, so I'm not going to mention the names. But I picked Chicago because first, they have the quirky admissions, and second, I was very interested in economics because I was starting to dabble a little bit in investments and stocks. And so since you guys should know, like Chicago has a very, very good economics program. Like they're the school who essentially writes what's called the freshwater theory of economics. So like it seemed really natural for me to pick Chicago. Yeah. Is there any other questions? Yeah.
How do you learn to learn?
See, that's interesting too. I talk a little bit about how to learn, kind of, in my next slides because I kind of did learn to learn. But you'll find there's a really famous quote by Plato that goes something like, "Success is a habit." Right. So for some people, you'll struggle through your entire life, or through like all of your high school years, and then you'll never sleep. And then you'll study really hard, and for some reason you still won't get good scores on the tests. But then for others, it seems like they're not putting in any effort, and they're getting A's all the way down as well. And then I was on both sides of the spectrum, so I know a little bit about what it feels like. I can't tell you exactly how to learn, but for me, I had like an epiphany moment where in like the beginning of my junior year, where I suddenly realized that I wasn't working hard, even though I kept telling myself that I was, and that if I were to work hard, suddenly everything would become very easy. And so I'll talk about that a little bit in my next section. Is there any more questions? No? All right. So next I'm going to talk about my application. All right. So this is what I sent to the University of Chicago that they looked at, and they decided to give me the privilege of admission. Okay. So these are my GPA stats. You'll notice that, especially I don't know if you guys know like about Lynbrook's culture, but my GPA stats are very, very below average. Especially my freshman and sophomore years. All right, so I got a C in French 2. I got B's in almost every single class my freshman year. Okay, I got a B in literature, which I think is amazing, even though I had the easiest teacher. And then junior year came along, and then suddenly my grades improved substantially. All right, so like, I don't know if this comes as a surprise to anyone, but people always go like, "Oh, like, how did you get to Chicago with your grades?" And I have friends who I think, in fact, are very, very smart kids who don't have great grades and who come to me and ask me how I got into school. So I'm essentially going to tell you what I tell them. All right. So before I go on, if anyone is interested, I scored a 2290 on my SAT. I scored a 34 on my ACT. I took the SAT twice. I took the ACT once. My course load, I took 6 APs in high school, which is like slightly above average for a Lynbrook student because we don't offer that many AP classes. But I also took 2 AP classes outside of school. I took World History AP and I took the Macroeconomics AP. So like that's just like fluff for anyone who's interested. Oh, it's not time to show you guys this slide yet. But essentially, I have like a kind of interesting story. Like you'll notice my GPA got better. Like so this is what college admissions officers consider like an upwards trend, right? Like some guy who didn't look like he was doing very well, who suddenly like found his wind or something, and who like ended up finishing fairly strong. But there's a couple of reasons for this, all right? And then I think these are very important for me. But the first reason is I made good friends. And then this is actually very, very important. Because through middle school, I moved here in 6th grade, so I kind of like floated around my groups of friends for quite a while before I found a group to settle down in. And I finally settled down around like end of freshman year, the beginning of sophomore year with a group of friends that all had better GPAs than me. So there's a funny story. I don't know if anyone here has been to a Lynbrook graduation or like a high school graduation. Doreen has, yeah. So essentially, at Lynbrook at least, they add suffixes with your accomplishments after your name when they call your name for roll call. So it's going to be like Eric Zhu, valedictorian, if you're a valedictorian, or like Kimberly Tan, salutatorian, Jasmine Chow, valedictorian. And then so in graduation you get to pick your seats. So I was sitting next to my friends. And then I was like the 9th or 10th name to be called, but everyone before me had a valedictorian after their name. So it was, you would hear like name after name, and it'd be valedictorian, valedictorian, valedictorian. Suddenly it'd be Frank Wang, and there was nothing after my name. And so that goes to tell you a little bit of something, because my friends all have like better stats than me. All my friends are like valedictorians, and so like that's one of the reasons why I saw this like drastic improvement in my grades, because suddenly I felt a lot of pressure to do well. Okay. The second reason is there was this really, really good article, and it was called, it was written by an admissions officer at MIT. They have what's called MIT's admissions blog. It's something I put a lot of their writing up on there. And essentially there was this article called Surviving MIT. Surviving MIT. And so what this article talked about was essentially this student who, I think it was like 10 or 15 years ago, applied to MIT, and he got in, and he, like, in his own words, he thought he was a hot shot because he just got into MIT, right? Like, it's a big deal. And he was really smart. He thought he was really smart. And then suddenly, 3 months later, he was struggling at MIT. He was like endangered of dropping out because he couldn't keep up with the classes, you know, stuff like that. So he tells the story about how he had a roommate who was 2 years older than him, who when he went to MIT initially, he was even more hotshot than him. He was a guy who skipped 4 years of math. Like, he was taking graduate classes in like freshman year. You know, he's a guy who, like, not only was he smart, he was also very social, and he got lots of sleep, which seems like almost a paradox to like high school students now. But essentially what he said was he had the guts to go ask that very, very smart guy for help. And then that smart guy sat down with him, and he taught him essentially the math and all the classes that he was struggling with. And then he learned this very valuable lesson, and that's that hard work pays off. That when you work hard, and that when you go and do your homework, and you do practice problems, and you study your books, and then you do more practice problems, you eventually develop your own tools. You develop like work habits that will make you make succeeding very, very easy. And that's what I found. So I read this article a while back, and I kind of just like sat myself down. I was like, oh gosh, like this really applies to me. And like I realized maybe I wasn't trying very hard. Like maybe I was not quite as good as everything as I thought I was. Maybe, you know, maybe I could like go back and take a look at my study habits again. And so that's what I did. And then this leads me to my third thing that helped me improve my GPA, and that was that sophomore year course selection. Oh, I could actually show you this next slide. Sophomore year course selection came along, and then I was trying to decide whether I wanted to take a class. I don't know if you guys know, at Lynbrook, AP US History is kind of considered one of the more difficult APs. Okay, and so I was trying to decide whether I wanted to take AP US History because, you know, like I was kind of like pretty good. I would consider myself pretty good at history because I'd read a lot of history books as a kid. And so I went to my sophomore year world history teacher, and I asked her for advice because it turns out world history was a class that I got a B in. And then the teacher told me this. She told me that I would enjoy the class a lot, but I probably shouldn't expect to get an A. And so, as you can imagine, that kind of peeved me a little bit, so I like kind of took it as a challenge. Like, I'm going to get an A and A push, right? I'm going to get an A and A push. So, A push on a test the first day of school, because there was summer reading. And then 3 days before the first day of school, I stayed up until 3 a.m. just like going through the book over and over and over again. And then, so the average score on that test for most students was a 72 on that first test. And that was after a 30% curve. So the actual first average grade was a 42%, and I got away with a 96. Right? So it's like, wow, like this is really cool. Like suddenly, like that wasn't even that hard. Like, I enjoyed that. Like I liked the studying. Suddenly, like I felt like I could be one of those like smart kids, right? Like so, it's like an inspiring moment for me. And so after that, I started applying that same kind of philosophy to a lot of my different classes. In particular, I struggled through calculus my first semester in junior year. But like I said earlier, second semester came along, and suddenly I found this appreciation of calculus. I didn't even have to study for tests, and I was getting A's because I was doing my homework properly. I was reading the book properly, and then like suddenly succeeding became like almost a habit. It was easy. It was easy to get good grades. Whereas before I would stay up later every night and I would still manage to get C's on all my tests. Right? So that's essentially me. I forgot to talk about something a little bit earlier, and that's why I started getting. That's why I got bad grades as a kid. And so the reason essentially is that I had very, very poor work habits. And when someone asked a question earlier, I answered with this. As a child in elementary school, I was taught math by my grandmother. I don't know if any of you guys did that as a kid, but she was very, very aggressive in teaching me math. As in, I would learn like my multiplication tables 3 years ahead of the other kids, and I would learn like my 2-digit multiplication like 2 years ahead of the other kids. And then so I don't know if you guys know, but there's like kind of the stereotype, like this like stereotypical image of like the math contest kid in high school, right? Like the kid who's, you know, like Amy, like high scores in Amy, high scores in the AMC, like high scores in the Mandelbrot, stuff like that. And like I was that kid in elementary school. I remember it was me. There was a little boy, a Korean boy named Michael. It's amazing I still remember this. But there was also this little girl named Ashley who would wear like pink to school every day. And so like it was the three of us in elementary school. Like in our entire elementary school, we're considered like the math kids who knew how to do math much better than everyone else. And so, of course, so the first couple of years of elementary school is very, very easy for me to get good grades in math. And then beyond that, I also really enjoyed reading on my own time. I really liked reading about history because my goal as a young child was to become a fighter pilot for the Navy. So I read all about like physics of like airplanes, like historical wars and like, you know, battles and stuff like that. So I could breeze through my math classes and my history classes no problem at all, right? And so like I just assumed I was talented. I assumed I can get away with getting smart. But there was a really important danger sign that I think, looking back, I can see it, and I never did before. And that's that I was very, very bad at English. All right. I remember I got a 0 on a vocabulary test. It was not even like a what does this word mean vocabulary test. It was like a matching vocabulary test, and I got a 0 on it, which is like amazing. Like statistically, it seems impossible that you could get a 0 on a test like that. But as a kid, like I said earlier, I breezed through math, I breezed through history, but I struggled a lot with literature. And then so as time went on, as like my grandma stopped teaching me how to like do math problems the way she used to do, I found that the other subjects started catching up to me. I remember I really hated my 8th grade geometry teacher. I got a C in that class. And then like, I don't know if I deserved a C, I think I deserve a B, but like, the moral of the story is because of these like habits that I developed, because I had an easy time in elementary school, I never really learned to work hard. And then beyond that, I never learned to identify with the fact that I was not working hard. I would always just assume, for example, that the reason why I was getting bad grades is because I'm not suited to the system, right? Like tests don't suit me. I'm not a test-taking person. I'm like a learning kind of person. And so that was my excuse for, you know, not studying harder. Like I told my parents, I am studying hard. Like I'm staying up. And it turns out like the whole time I'm on Facebook, right? And so these are all like little delusions that I had. And then junior year came along, and then there was that epiphany moment that I talked about a little bit earlier. An epiphany moment that I was not working hard, that there was more to learning than I thought, and that I could do it if I put the effort in. And so like after that, suddenly, that's all right. Suddenly like everything was downhill from there. Like senior year, I feel like was probably the easiest year I've ever had. I didn't struggle with any of my classes, right? I would essentially go into my finals without studying. Don't do that, kids. That's not a good thing. That's not what I'm telling you to do. But essentially I was fine in all my classes senior year. I had a very, very easy time. And so beyond the GPA is like probably the most interesting part of my story. But this sort of trend kind of applies to like the extracurriculars in terms of college admissions as well. So for example, this is the list of my extracurriculars as a freshman and sophomore. There's not like this is what it's supposed to be. Like this is my list of extracurriculars as a freshman and a sophomore. There's nothing. All right, and then so junior and senior year was a little bit different. I found myself, I had a lot of very, very good opportunities. So the first is my dad has coworkers in China at Hebei University, and I helped them co-author a paper. It was a game theory paper on employee suicide rates, like because of the whole Foxconn, like, you know, like that whole like labor like sort of thing. We played like a game theory backwards, and then like it's called Nash Equilibrium, and then this paper was published in East Asian journal of like human resource management, something like that. And so like this is a published paper that I helped co-author. My name is on it. And this was all thanks to my dad. So like I guess that's a little bit unfair. All right. And then I didn't actually do as much work on it as the fact that my name is on the paper suggests. And that's like an interesting theme that you'll find over and over in high school. You hear about people who like win Intel awards, who will do like what seems like very, very impressive projects. And while all those people are all very, very qualified, what you'll find in reality is that a lot of the work was done by like, for example, like the professors they study with, or like you know, mentors or like parents who helped them through it. So first is like you don't have to think of like the smart people as like like giants or gods or like people who you'll never be, because in reality they're not quite as good as you think. All right. The second thing I did was I started an academic journal. Like it's kind of like the whole East Asian journal, except it's for younger students. So we started, it's called the Zeka Student Academic Journal. There was something really intellectual about the name Zeka. I don't remember what it is, embarrassingly enough. But what it was essentially we wanted to publish the research papers of minors who weren't quite as good, like they were not quite as good as the ones that got published in like the real, like the big name like research papers such as Nature, you know, those sort of things. But what we did is we said, we marketed Zeka extensively, and then we got submissions from all over the world. So we got submissions from the United Kingdom, we got submissions from places like Alabama, Maine, we had one from New Zealand. And so like this was, in reality it was not that much work, because all it took was, you know, every quarter we would like put together like we would edit the papers into like a journal, and then besides that we would market to people. And so it wasn't much work, but this is one of the things that sounds very impressive on my application in my opinion. It's like one of the better things that I can talk about. The third thing is this organization called Youth Impact International, which is a group of, so essentially it was a charitable group that was started by a friend of mine named Matthew Lee. And what we did in the summer before junior year was we went to Yunnan in China, which is right by the Tibetan border, and we published a book that was meant to fundraise money that was filled with like pictures and like commentary on several orphanages that we visited in Yunnan. And then so we took that book to the Hong Kong Book Fair after our trip. It was all done in like 10 days. And then we sold that book at the book fair, and we raised $22,000 for those orphanages. And then we directed that money as advisors to like renewable projects, like it was essentially business investment, as opposed to like charitable gifts, right? So that way, instead of like giving them pencils that will like dole out after a certain amount of use, we bought them things that would save them money, such as like solar panels or like, you know, water heaters, things like that. Or we gave them the capital as an investment in order for them to like find ways to earn their own money. All right. And then the third thing that we did was I was given the opportunity to become a student construction representative. And what this was is our school has been doing some construction recently. First, we built a media room. Most people at Lynbrook probably don't know about this, but built a media room where there's rental equipment available for students in terms of like video cameras, like tripods. And I was on the committee to help decide what to buy and manage like budgets and stuff. And I was like the student representative, along with like the real architects and the real like school administrators. And I was also given the opportunity to be a part of a project that hasn't happened yet, but essentially they're building a community room behind the library of our school. And then so I sat along and I looked at like plans from the architects, and like essentially we tried to give a student's perspective of this. And so I'll talk about how I got these opportunities in a little bit, okay? But the takeaway from the school construction representative thing was that I worked a lot with the principal, because the principal was the one who chose these representatives. And then later on in the beginning of my junior year, when I was, because all colleges require you to have what's called like a school administrator recommendation. It's supposed to be from a guidance advisor, but like all the administrators write it. And then the principal, who I worked with a lot in terms of like doing this project, was the one to write my essay. And so, as you can imagine, she could say much better things about me because she knew me. She knew my name than the kid who she was writing for that she didn't. Right. So that was the takeaway from these are my four primary, my biggest extracurriculars after junior year. And then so finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about my long-term activities before I talk about how I got these opportunities. But it's funny because my long-term activities, they were the ones I found the most gratifying and like the most enjoyable for me. But ironically, they're the ones that don't seem to be quite as impressive on paper. And so the first one of these is music. All right. And so I'm not a huge music person. I played the B-flat clarinet in our school band, and I played it there for 4 years. I'm okay at clarinet. I'm considered like one of the better kids because I had a private teacher. I would practice every now and then. And so what's important was that I was all right, right? But why music was very, very important to me wasn't because I loved music a huge deal. Like, I think music is very cool right now. Like, it's something that I'm starting to get back into now that I have time. But it wasn't a huge deal for me intrinsically, but the reason why I thought music was a big deal was because it exemplified good musicians versus bad musicians. It essentially showed me what the reward for hard work could be. And so the best example I can think of, there's a kid named Jeff Leo. He's at Columbia now. Has anyone heard of him? No, yeah, you've heard of him? He's a little bit shy, so he's not like, that's why you probably haven't heard of him, but essentially he's amazingly talented at clarinet. Have you guys heard of CYS, the California Youth Symphony? So it's like one of the more prestigious youth symphonies, youth orchestras in the area. And so Jeff Leo went to CYS, and he was in the senior band, like the top band, and he was the principal clarinet in his freshman year, which is very, 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 very impressive because most people don't even get into the senior ensemble their freshman year. Okay, and so it's kind of a sad story. He's at Columbia now. His plan originally was to do the Columbia Juilliard dual degree program, but his clarinet broke before his Juilliard audition, so it's very, very sad. But I'm talking about Jeff Leo because Jeff Leo was the reason why you can see that good musicians and bad musicians are different. It's not about talent, because Jeff Leo put 4 hours of practice into his instrument every single day, no fail, right? Like he loved that thing. Like he enjoyed practicing. Right? I would see him practicing in the band room during lunch and during like brunch and during after school and during 7th period. Like he was always in there practicing, and beyond that, he'd also practice at home. Like he listened to classical music all day, and so it's no wonder that Jeff Leo is better at clarinet than me, when I only practice at most maybe 4 hours a week as opposed to 4 hours a day, right? So this is the biggest example. Suddenly you have like a real person who's showing you that hard work pays off. All right, so this is why music was really important to me. The second thing that was really important to me was my photography and design. And so I talked, not everyone was here. I answered the question earlier. It's that I had, initially I had a very big passion for photography and a very big passion for design. And this led me to want to apply to art school in the first couple of years of my high school experience, okay? But the reason why photography and design was important to me, first, it's, I was a member of Yearbook. So I joined Yearbook sophomore year as a photographer. And then I became the design editor my junior year. If you're at Lynbrook, the black book, the untitled book, you know the black yearbook, right? I designed the cover to that book, and I designed some of the pages on the inside. But essentially, since I was a little bit more involved in design and photography, like it's something that I actually like to do, I was like, I think it's fairly safe to say, even if it sounds terrible, like that I was a little bit better than other people in terms of like their skills and abilities and talent at photography and design. Because I cared about photography, and I cared about design, and so I worked really hard at it. Okay, so last year I was the design editor, so if you guys see the book this year, which is the one with the shapes in the front, I essentially designed all the pages on the inside, because it was something that I really, really liked to do. And then this is important to me because, remember the whole construction representative extracurricular that I had? The reason why I got it was because the advisor to Yearbook, he teaches special education, but his name is Mr. Schussler. He recommended me to the principal when the principal asked for references. And then what's important here is, I think this really shows you that you should do things that you're very passionate about, because you will be better at it than if you do something that you hate. And so because I was passionate about photography, because I was passionate about design, I was able to do a good job, and thus that's why Mr. Schussler recommended me as opposed to some random other guy from Yearbook, right? And that's what got me that opportunity. But then the other thing is, this should be supposed to be like another line there. I might have made a mistake making PowerPoint. But the other thing for me was suddenly I was working alongside people who were also fairly talented and fairly good, and I could watch them as they improved in their craft, and watch them as they like became more involved and more talented, or like they developed their own skills, right? And that puts pressure on me, because if I wanted to be better than everyone else, I would have to work harder, right? And then so over time, first of all, it gave me an ego check, because I used to think I was the go-to person for design, I was the go-to person for photography, I'm so good at photography. And then suddenly I was seeing like all these other kids who got into photography after me, wow, they're getting better very, very fast. Like, oh my, what am I gonna do? And then so it gave me motivation to work harder at the things that I like to do. All right, so that's why photography and design was important to me. But then the last thing was it gave me very, very good essay topics. So what I found writing essays for college was that if you write about something and then whatever you're writing about is how you honestly feel, your essays will seem much, much better. they will seem honest. They will seem like you feel like you're talking to me as opposed to like reading some random essay from some random kid in some random county, right? And so I wrote 2 essays for my Common App. The first one I wrote about my research paper, and I wrote about how like academic inquiry was really cool, how like learning for the sake of learning was really cool. But since I didn't actually do as much work on the research paper as it sounds like I did not quite feel quite as strongly about the things I was saying. So in my experience, that essay was much, much weaker than the other essay that I wrote, which was about me climbing with a friend of mine to Sentinel Dome, which is a hike in Yosemite National Park. And so it's weird because a lot of people like to tell you, oh, write about something academic, write about something that sounds like you're a hard worker, or something that like college would stereotypically like oh, write about the Amy contest, write about speech and debate, you know. So, but the thing for me is I didn't write about any of those like academic things. I wrote about something I really, really liked to do, which was Yosemite. And frankly, I'm very, 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 very proud of that essay, because everything that I wrote about essentially how it was very quiet on the top of the dome, and like when there's no sound, it's a very unique experience. And so that was something that I actually thought about when I was there. I wasn't thinking about my college essay, but I was like, wow, it's so quiet up here. Like I can't hear anything. There's no like streets. There's no cars, you know. And then there was also this tree at the top of Sentinel Dome, and then it was visited by a very famous photographer named Ansel Adams like 70 years before. And I was just thinking about how it's called the Joshua Pine, if anyone wants to look it up. The piece of photography is called the Joshua Pine. And the tree's dead. Right? The tree's dead now. Like it was alive when the photographer visited, but I thought it was amazing that like that matter, like whatever that matter was in that tree, that was the same thing that that famous photographer saw, right? And that he was the guy who hiked up to the Sentinel Dome, and he was standing in the same place as us, like 7 years ago. And like these are all thoughts that went through my head while I was there. I was not thinking about college essays, but then I went home and I realized that it was a really, really good thing to talk about. So I went and I wrote that essay, and then this is the only essay that I wrote that I did not have to go back and rewrite. That I didn't like. All my other essays, I was like, I don't really like this. I rewrote it from scratch. But this one, I wrote it, and I was like, this is like the one. Like, this is the one I'm really, really proud of. And so, doing things that you like, the takeaway is doing things that you like. Don't avoid them, because they will give you like insightful things that will become really important to you later on in life. Whether it's like writing your college essays, or simply becoming like a more interesting, more like deep person, right? And then so now I'm about to talk about like my advice for high schoolers. Is there any questions about what I did in high school before I go on? Yeah.
Did you do any volunteering work?
Actually, I did not. So it's interesting because everyone tells you to do that. It's definitely not a bad thing to do. Okay, but I did not do any like formal volunteer hours. The only charitable work I did was the work for Youth Impact International, and then that was primarily motivated by the fact that I love photography. Is there any other questions? Yeah.
So when you apply college, which test do you use? SAT
I submitted both.
Okay.
I submitted both. Yeah.
Oh, what did you get for the score again?
SAT was a 2290, and then my ACT was a 34, which is like a 2270, 2260 equivalent, or 22. It's roughly the same. They're roughly the same.
Which 2 teachers you asked for recommendation?
Oh, is this? Does your kid go to Lynbrook? Okay, so I asked Mr. Howden, who is the A-push teacher, which is the teacher that I, found my wind in. And the other teacher I asked was Mr. Miller, because, well, it was a class that, well, frankly, I just liked Mr. Miller, and I thought he might like me, so I asked him for a recommendation.
What did he teach?
He teaches American literature. Yeah. And then it's not the AP literature class, so I was, essentially the other kids in the class were not quite as, up to speed as, the rest of the school. And so, yeah.
So you asked
humanities, yeah. I think the fact that it's probably, if you have the option to pick a math, science, and then a humanities teacher, it's a good idea. But honestly, I don't think it was that big of a deal. It's more important to have teachers that understand you. I did go and ask my calculus teacher, Miss Frazita, for a recommendation, but just in case, I was planning on, in case I wanted to apply to a more STEM-oriented school, I could submit those applications instead. But Lynbrook now has a policy that you can only ask 2 teachers for recommendations, so I ended up dropping her. And then, so the reason why I asked Miss Frazita was because I had that really big improvement from first semester to second semester. But then the other issue was that she asked you for your notebook of homework, and my notebook of homework was not very good. So that's why I didn't end up asking her for a recommendation. Yeah.
Wait, when is the new policy put in place?
I thought it was put in place last year. like I went and asked my counselor specifically if I was allowed to do that, and she said no. So I was like, uh-oh.
Heard of that.
Yeah. Yeah?
Do you think sports matter a lot? I see that you didn't put any sports on your...
I didn't include any sports here because while I'm not unactive, I do like sports. I played, let's see, so freshman year I was in the track and field team. I ran hurdles, right? Sophomore year I ran cross country, like the distance running team. And then sophomore year I also did junior varsity soccer, but junior and senior I played varsity soccer for Lynbrook. But the issue is, to be honest, athletics was not something I've always been like incredibly talented at. Like in reality, I blame myself for not working harder at it because once again hard work is a really big theme for me personally. But it just happened to be something that I wasn't very good at. So I didn't get a huge amount of playing time as a kid on the varsity soccer team. I got maybe like 15 minutes a game. And so all in all, I felt like I did include them on my application. They were on the list of the resume that I sent to the schools, but it wasn't one of the big epiphany moments for me. Although, in a lot of ways, athletics also exemplifies the hard work that I mentioned in music. It's just that at Lynbrook, since we're not a hugely athletic school, we don't have the superstars to really make it very, very obvious to me.
So when you were doing your application, for example, for the music, you actually list out what you achieved in the music, for example?
Well, first I wrote that I was in the Lynbrook Wind Ensemble, which is their senior wind ensemble. And then I've been there for 3 years. 2 years. And then I also mentioned that freshman and sophomore year, I was the concert master of the lower ensemble. So I was concert master of the concert band, and I was concert master of the symphonic band. Because like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't terrible at clarinet. For the lower echelon kids, I was okay. But when I got to the higher end ones where all the big kids were playing, I suddenly was not quite as good. Last year I sat 4th seat in the clarinet section out of 20. So it's not horrible. I was able to make friends with Jeff Leo because I was in the right league. I wasn't the kid who sat in the very back of the ensemble. So it's important to be in roughly the right place because that's what's going to give you the opportunities to make the good friends.
Okay. I have one last question.
Sure.
Which is you kept on talking about the work habits that you have reached the epiphany moment. So what did you do before versus what did you do afterwards that can you describe a little bit more?
It's very hard to describe simply because
you are studying at both situations.
I think a big one for me, so the honest truth be told, even after my epiphany moment, I would spend probably more time not studying than I should have been. So while I was studying, I would be on my computer doing other things. That's just one of my confessions. But it was. Well, so every subject is different, right? So, but the first subject, let's say A push, was I started caring about the details. So essentially, I've always been a really big picture person. I really like asking really big questions. So recently, I've been really interested in this whole multiple universe question. I don't know if you've heard of the multiple universe interpretation of Einstein's general theory of relativity. But it's a big question what the universe is, or I've really been interested about what it means that reality is here. So I've been focused on big pictures, big trends, and that's why I liked and I understood history, but I got bad grades in the tests because the tests test the details that are in the book. And so I found patterns in the test. For example, if there's a list, memorize it, because if there's a list, the test is going to ask you which of these things was not on the list in the book, right? And then so when you find patterns like that, you become much more in tune. You don't have to put quite as much time and effort into doing the same thing, and you'll get better results. The other thing was for more STEM subjects like math. I was never good at chem, but this applied later senior year in physics, was that to do your practice problems. And because I was always I didn't consider myself dumb in that I couldn't understand topics. I would never struggle to understand any of the concepts, but I would struggle to get the right answer on the questions. And then that's because I would never seriously do my homework. And then that was a habit I developed as a kid because I never did my homework. But then I suddenly realized, well, if I do my calculus homework now, and I do it legitimately, and then I go beyond that. Right now I have a hobby of going back, looking at different calculus equations, and trying to derive them without looking at the proofs online, trying to be creative myself. And so these sort of things, actually doing the problems really improves your fluency, and then you'll find that when the test comes along, you don't even have to study for them. Because you'll know the equations by heart, you'll know how to do the problems.
So you were mentioning your grandma was teaching you math, and the fact that you did not do homework that much? Is it because you knew the subject, so when the homework comes along, you just breeze through it? And
I wouldn't even do it, actually. Up until like 4th or 5th grade, I wouldn't even do my homework.
Okay.
Because first, second, third grade, even with the 0 or like a 10% on my homework, I could get an A in the class because I was essentially like 100% test scores.
Oh,
yeah.
So that's why you say it's a bad habit.
This is what caused me to have bad work habits. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so I'm going to move on, just in case we're out of time. We'll have like a long question session at the end, okay? So the final segment is advice for high school students, all right? Okay. And then so, essentially I have this broken up into 2 parts. The first is the broad advice. So it's like the kind of cliche things like, oh, follow your dreams or like whatever. And then so this is for like, this is applicable not just through high school, but also I think through like life in general. This is like some of the things I've thought a lot about, like as I became, I think, more mature, I guess. And then I also have a more narrow segment that's more focused towards like college admissions as a whole. And so like depending on whether you're like not even thinking about applications yet, you're just here because you're your parents, or like if you're like about to like apply, the different advice is gonna have different bearing, like it's gonna have different amounts of applicability to you. And so the first thing I want to talk about is like opportunities and how I got my opportunities. And so, excuse me, I didn't make note cards for these because it didn't occur to me to make note cards until this afternoon. But this is one of the broad things. And so how you get opportunities, I felt, for me, the biggest factor was finding something you really, really like and doing it very well. Because you'll notice I had some kind of unique opportunities in my life, like opportunities to like meet the principal, opportunities to like visit different places. And so if you do the things you enjoy and you do a good job, people will notice. And so whether that's like my counselor, like not my counselor, our advisor at Yearbook, Mr. Schussler, who recommended me to the principal for my for the construction spot, or it's like the friends that I made who asked me to go on these trips with them because they had heard about me. If you're good at what you do, people will notice, and then when their opportunity comes up, where they make an opportunity, they will come to you and they'll ask, like they will tell you. In reality, I personally did not go around making a huge number of opportunities. Like I did run to be, I am the officer of like some clubs at school. Like I'm an officer of like the photography club. I'm an officer of like it's a club called the JSA, which is the Junior State of America, things like that. And I guess those things I got, but those are really the unique opportunities, right? The unique opportunities are the things that I talked about earlier, and then I didn't initiate any of that. But then, because I was good at photography, that's why Matthew Lee, which is the guy who started Youth International, came to me and asked me if I would be interested in going on that trip. Because since he had heard about my photography, since he saw my photography on Facebook, I guess he thought I was like good enough at photography to go with him on the trip. And so that's why he asked me, and that's why I got the opportunity to do that. The other thing is like the Zeka Journal, for example. The reason why I was able to become a member of become one of the founding members of that was because the other guy who had the idea to start the group wanted someone who knew how to design. And so I was huge at editorial design. And so he was like, oh, Frank, would you mind being my partner and like starting the Zeka Academic Journal with me? I said yes, and so that's like my second opportunity. And finally, I already talked about Yearbook and how like our advisor liked me in particular because I was very passionate about like the topics that we covered in Yearbook. And that's like one of the ways I've found is very, very good at giving opportunities. Like you have to be known for something at least, and then opportunities in other subjects will always come to you. All right, but also, and this is really important, is the, getting opportunities. A big part of that has to do with the next piece of advice I have to give you, and that's making good friends. So I talked a little bit about the Yunnan Journal, and I talked a little bit about like the Yunnan book and the Zeka Journal, and so like both of those, it's because the people who asked me, like first they had heard about my abilities in like certain areas, right? But secondly, it's also important that they were fairly well acquainted with me in the first place. So like I was very, very good friends with Matthew. He did the De Anza College Now program this year, so unfortunately he wasn't with us throughout my high school years. But sometimes he would visit us at Lynbrook, and then we would have these really long talks about like economics. So I remember one day we had to talk about like whether or not it's good to like privatize currency. So like if you had like multiple competing currencies in the same markets, is that good or bad? And we talked about that for like a week. And then we had talks about like freshwater economics versus saltwater economics, like Keynesian economics versus like Austrian economics. He introduced me to funny economics videos. So like we're very good friends now because, well, first of all, he's majoring in economics too. But because we went on this trip, because he was my friend in the first place, I got the opportunity to go on that trip. And then the second thing is the Zeka Journal was started by a fellow named Hazik, and he's going to Johns Hopkins University. He's in pre-med. He's going to be in pre-med, which is like what Johns Hopkins is very good at. But essentially, with him, we were acquainted. He was a new student, first of all, but he was very, very involved in Lynbrook speech and debate. And he was probably, I would consider, the most successful debater that went through Lynbrook last year. I don't know if you guys have, anyone here like involved in debate at all? Or like, have you heard of debate? There's a really big tournament called Berkeley, like the Berkeley Invitational at Lynbrook, at Berkeley. And then so it's like one of the big tournaments that we go to every year. And he was the #1 speaker in his, in varsity Lincoln Douglas. And then he won, I believe, he was in the top 8 in terms of like the actual like debates. Like, so top speaker means that you get speaking scores that are higher than everyone else. And then so this is very impressive considering in his topic, there were 264 contenders at Berkeley this year. And he was the #1 speaker, which is, I don't know. So he's one of the kids who was very passionate about something. But since I was also involved in speech and debate, I'm not quite as good as him. And like, I'm not amazingly talented. It's not a huge part of my life. But because I was in Lynbrook speech and debate, I was friends with Hazik. And so that's why he wasn't afraid to come ask me to help him design his Zeka journal. And that's like why I got those opportunities. So that's the first benefit of making good friends. But then the second thing, and I think this is even more important, is that you will always become your friends. It's, no matter what you think, like if you hang out with druggies, more than likely you will end up doing some sort of drug. Like maybe not as bad as your friends, but like the pressure is always there. Okay? If you hang out with kids who like to drink alcohol, you're inevitably going to probably drink alcohol before you should, right? Or if you hang out with kids who like don't like to study, who only like go around like the park and bike 24 hours a day, I don't know, then you're probably going to become like them. Like no matter what you think, you are very, very, very influenced by your friends. And so with me, I was very lucky because the people I got along with were all very, very smart. I mentioned like the whole valedictorian story. It was very embarrassing for me, but in the long term of things, like it's clearly been very good for me. And so a couple things came in mind. First is that my friends would ask me to study with them. So for A-Push throughout the years, maybe it's because I did well on the first test, but every single subsequent test after that, we would all get together to study at some coffee shop. And in those settings, you don't have like a computer to distract you. You just have a book, so like your productivity goes up a lot. And then all your friends are there too, and your friends are encouraging you to study. And then in the process, they're making you essentially a better student along with them, right? And so that's the first thing. But then another thing was I suddenly felt a lot of pressure to go to a good school. So earlier someone asked the question, it was an online question, like when did I become motivated to go to a good school? And the answer partly has to do with the fact that all my friends were smart, all my friends were talking about going to good schools. And then so I was like, wow, what if all my friends go to Harvard and then I'm stuck at De Anza? Like what if all my friends go to Princeton and I'm stuck at like, I don't know, UC Riverside? And it became very, very, it ended up being like a lot of pressure for me. So I was like, oh, I have to find a way that I'm going to get into a good school. Like I want to go to the school that my friends would all be proud of. And then so it's funny because even though they pressured me, the reality is I ended up going to a lot of I'm going to a better school than a lot of my friends, even though they were all very, very good students. And I might talk a little bit about I'm talking a little bit about this when I get into the more narrow advice. But part of it might have to do with the fact that I was struggling in the first place. And then like the process of getting good, like I think made me a very interesting person to say the least. And then so it motivated me to work very hard on my essays. It motivated me to work really hard in terms of like showing interest to Chicago. And so those two things might have something to do with the fact that I got into Chicago. Maybe not, maybe. Like I said, it's impossible to know for sure. But if it weren't for my friends, I would not be who I am today. Like that's just the plain fact. Remember how I mentioned Eric Zhu, how he's going to Princeton? Like he's a valedictorian. He's also very, very good at clarinet. And he's like been a very big role model for me for the last couple of years. My friends always joke, oh, like, wow, I wish I could be Eric Zhu. Or it's like we always fight for Eric Zhu's time or something like that. And then like it's joking, but a lot of it's also true because he is frankly an amazing person. And if it were for him like influencing me, it's hard to say whether or not I would be quite as good as I am today. But so it's important to make good friends. That's the first thing. The second piece of broad advice, so this is the third piece of broad advice, And this sounds really, really cliche, but it's follow your dreams. Okay, so like I don't know if like this is like a big cliche thing when you like listen to like a university like commencement speaker talk. It's like, oh, follow your dreams, and then everyone just falls asleep because something that everyone has heard so many times and like nobody really like takes it seriously anymore. But I think this is actually very important. So so to the parents here. I think what this means for you is that if your kid is interested in something, if he's passionate about something, don't try to stifle it. Because if he's passionate about something, that could lead him to better things in the future, whether it's like being a better person, or a person with better habits, or a person with, you know, a more interesting story with a richer life or whatever. Don't stifle their dreams. Okay, so that's really important. And then like, so what I've been really lucky because essentially I was a rebel kid when I was like I would yell at my parents. I would like, you know, lock myself in the bathroom when they told me to study because I was really frustrated at my grades. Like, I am trying hard, Mom. Like, just leave me alone, please. But I would have been really lucky because my mom and my dad never tried to stifle my talent or my interest in photography. They never tried to stifle my interest in design. And so, like, it was my parents, for example, who made it possible for me to buy my first camera. It wasn't a D90, it was a D5000. But like, essentially, if it weren't for them, like, it would be very difficult for me to like gain those opportunities I talked about. So like, if you see like, there's like kind of like a domino effect here, right? If you stifle something that might not seem immediately relevant to your kids' like college admissions, suddenly, if it weren't for like the photography, I would not have the opportunity to go to UNI. I would not have the opportunity to go to Zeka. I would not have the opportunity to meet with a principal, right? It's like suddenly there's 3 things gone, and then you wouldn't initially expect it. But it's all because of this complete, like, seemingly unrelated thing, photography. So like, advice to parents is don't stifle your kids, all right? Like, if you like doing something, let them do it, all right? And within reason. So like, also don't let them do whatever they want. But the other word of advice, and this is for kids, before you like look at your parents like, oh, see, they just let me play more video games. The word of advice for kids is don't be so quick to jump to what your talents and what your passions and what your dreams are. Because, like I mentioned earlier, like the piano example, everyone who happened to just drop out of piano because their parents stopped making them play, suddenly is not able to appreciate what piano might have given them. Suddenly there's this opportunity cost, right? So, also, the other example I had, I did have another example, was me personally in regards to humanities versus math. And remember, when I was answering a question earlier, I mentioned how my initial impressions about engineering and math and science was like, wow, this is just stupid. This is just like, a calculator could do all this. Like, why do I have to study this? It's not interesting. But that's because I had these preconceived notions of what math and what science was. And then, since I was operating under these preconceived notions, I wasn't interested in studying math, which led me to be further down. It's like a vicious cycle where you don't like studying and so you hate the subject more, and then you don't like studying and you hate the subject more. But if you get yourself in that upwards positive feedback loop, what you'll find is that everything that you think you hate actually has more depth than you think. So I used to be a huge humanities guy. I like philosophy. I like, you know, history. Those things were interesting to me because I could explain everything, and math was just adding numbers together and like pushing on letters. It seemed really stupid. But then suddenly, when I gave math a chance, it turns out math takes a lot of creativity. Like, I thought creativity was an art thing. It's not. Like, in order to solve a math problem, you have to look at it creatively. And then so there's something like, whenever you do solve that math problem, you get this like really nice reward. Like, wow, like I never thought to think about it that way. Or like, suddenly when you talk about things like calculus, it's like, oh, jeez, I don't want to remember like f prime of cosine is equal to sine, negative sine, right? It suddenly becomes like, oh, why is it like that? Why is f prime of cosine negative sine? And then you start to wonder, and then you start to, like, if you start to do these things yourself, and it's like, oh, like, that's so interesting. Like, that's why f prime of cosine is negative sine. But then, like, you realize that leads to other things. So it's like, oh, that connects with physics all of a sudden. Like, all of a sudden, since I know, like, the derivative of cosine, I can go derive, like, how the k-constant equation comes out. Like, you derive all these things yourself, and it's really amazing to me how everything just, like, links together. And, like, math is like this long length of things that you learn. But then when you get to the end of it, you realize that you're back at the beginning, and everything was, like, interlinked in the middle, like, all along. And then if you had looked for it, it would have been there. Like, you just never looked for it. And so when I mean follow your dreams, but don't be quick to make them, I mean that you might have these dreams that you think you have. You might have these dreams that, you might have these preconceived notions of what you're good at, what you're interested in, but don't be too quick to assume that those are what your real talents are. Don't be so quick to assume that those are what your real passions are, because if you give a lot of subjects a chance, if you like decide to like walk into the pool a little bit past your toes, even though it's cold, you'll find out that like everything has a lot of depth, like literally everything. Whether it be like medicine, or whether it be like botany, I don't know if you want to study plants, whether you want to study like cotton fibers or like fashion or like photography or how to build a door, how to be a carpenter, like everything has an amazing amount of depth. Everything has its value. And the only reason why you think some things are stupid is because you don't know that depth exists yet. And so if you give it a chance, if you like sink that a little bit lower, if you like decide to like just like grit your teeth and go on like that a little bit more, you'll find like yourself, maybe you'll like, it's like essentially, like imagine yourself in like a boring house and then like oh, I just want to get out of here, and you leave. And then you'll never know what was inside that house, right? But if you decide to go on, like, I don't have time for this, but I'm just going to open this door. Maybe behind that door is like a bunch of gold bars. You would never know if you hadn't opened that door, right? So that's what I mean by follow this dream. Even though follow your dream is a cliche in terms of like commencement speeches, like you guys know what a commencement speech is? It's when university graduations, they invite some sort of really prestigious, famous, usually it's an alumni, sometimes it's not, to come talk. But recently a lot of commencement speeches, it's not just been about following your dreams, it's about letting your dreams change. And so there's a really famous one. I don't know if you guys know Conan O'Brien. He's actually a comedian, but he does like news comedy, kind of like political satire, things like that. And he did a commencement speech at Dartmouth. And this is a speech that I show all my speech class kids, even though half of them are too young to understand it. But essentially what he says is, he gave another commencement speech at Harvard in 2000. And he said at that speech to follow your dreams and don't be afraid to fail. And then he comes back in Dartmouth in 2011, he says, so I said follow your dreams and don't be afraid to fail, but the reality is your dreams can change and you should let them change. And this is what I mean by this. Don't be like anchored to any one passion, because if you don't try new things, you'll never find out what your real passions are. All right? And then so with that in mind, I'm going to move on to something that's a little bit more narrow, and then this is essentially like kind of a transition one because it has narrow applications, but it also has very broad applications, and this is to be different. And so the broad application of this, is when you do things in high school, when you do things in college, you want to make sure you find your own spot, right? So you don't want to follow the well-worn path. If you guys know like Robert Frost, you take the path less traveled by, and that made all the difference. You want to be different in terms of like picking what you do. So you don't need to do something just because someone else likes to do it. You do something because you like to do it because it helps you find your unique place in society or whatever. So that's like the really broad cliche example that I can talk about. But the other thing is more specific in terms of college admissions. And then this one seems to make a lot of sense to me, but at the same time, it's one of the most neglected things about college admissions in my opinion. And it's that people follow the well-worn path too much. So everyone is trying to get the high SAT. Everyone is trying to get the good ACT scores, or the the AP classes, or like the high GPA or whatever. So you're competing for the same prize in the same way. So I don't know if anyone here is in marketing. Any of the parents here are in marketing? No. But like, there's a really big a proportion of marketing talks about how it's easier to sell a product to someone not by being better, but by being different. So the reasoning for this is this: like, essentially, if you build a product, and you put it on the market, and you're trying to compete with the same spot as someone else, then consumers will just look at these two products and they'll buy the better one. And you never know if you're going to be the better one. And sometimes, in the case of marketing, you might be. Sometimes you might not be. But someone will always come along and beat you one day, right? And then, but in the case of college admissions, this becomes even more pronounced because suddenly you have, okay, you want to compete for GPAs or AP classes. Okay, hypothetically, I took 10 AP classes. I don't know, that's a lot of AP classes. I'm so proud. But you know what? There's always going to be that guy who took 11. I'm sorry. There's always that guy who took 11. And then if you're trying to compete based on how many AP classes you took, that guy who took 11 is always going to get the spot before you. Does that make sense? So unless you think you can have the highest GPA in the entire world, or the highest number of AP classes in the entire world, the highest SAT score in the entire world, there's a limit. Like, you can't take 100 AP classes because that many AP classes doesn't exist, unfortunately, right? You can't get higher than a 2400 on SAT. So suddenly, even if you get perfect everything, if you take every single AP class, you get a perfect ACT and a perfect SAT, someone else also has that. You're not special. There's no reason for the college to take you over that person. So what my philosophy was, and this is the philosophy I approached my college admissions with, was I wanted to be really different. And then what I mean by that is, first of all, after the admissions officer read my paper, I want him to remember my paper. Like, he's like, oh, that's the guy who did that thing. Like, that's so cute. We're like, that's so interesting. That's so quirky, you know? Where I want the admissions officer to be like, you know, I want to be like, if all the applications were like this big stack of paper, there's 20,000 essays, right? I want to be the essay in the middle that's printed on yellow paper instead of white paper, right? I don't care if it's like, if my essay is blank, but if your paper is yellow, suddenly you're memorable, right? so like that's the kind of approach I took. There was a really interesting story about a couple of years ago. There was a college essay. I don't remember which school it was, but it was asking the prompt was to tell us about your greatest risk. All right, this is a funny story. But then so it was supposed to be a three-page essay. But what one student did was he submitted an essay that was like 5 words. Maybe I'm miscounting the words, but he made a really, really big type. And he submitted 3 pages that said, "This is the biggest risk I've ever made." And that's it. Like that's the only thing he submitted. He got into the college. Okay. And so like that's the sort of thing that I really encourage you guys to do, because no matter how good your essay is about like aiming math, if it's not something unique, you're just going to be one out of another 1,000 kids who wrote about like taking math contests, right? Or you're just going to be one out of another 10,000 kids who wrote about speech and debate. You don't want to be that, because when the dean starts asking the admissions officers, what kid you recommend, why is he going to pick you out of the 10,000 kids who might be better than you, who might be the same as you? There's no reason for him to pick you. So the approach that I took was to make myself different. And so I have 2 primary examples for what I did. And it's funny because these things are very, very small. They don't seem like a big deal. But suddenly you become memorable because of them. The first thing that I did, and this is the more trivial one, was that instead of like submitting my essay as like a Word document that's filled with text, like everyone else does, I took my paper, and then the Common App allows you to submit in Word, it allows you to submit in PDF. And then so what's good about PDF is, as a designer, I know this, that PDF lets you save your formatting. So the College Board isn't smart enough to take all the pictures and stuff off of your PDF. It's not smart enough to like reformat your PDF like they can do with the Word document. So when you submit a PDF to the Common App, the PDF is in the exact same formatting as you submitted it. So what I did was I went on InDesign, which is the application that I used to like make my editorial designs, and I formatted all my essays like I would do to a book. So like there was like drop caps, and then it was just like, it wasn't anything fancy, but it was really neat. And then it was something that's a little bit different. So when all of your papers look like, I don't know, like just like a regular block of text, mine's the one with like the big margins, and like the big T in the front, and it's in 10-point font, and the title is like this nice, like nicely picked typeface. And so like that's one thing that makes it stand out. Like it doesn't matter initially what the essay was about. No matter what it's about, suddenly you're the essay that was formatted kind of differently from everyone else, right? And the second thing that I did, and this was a little bit more significant, I think, is it's really common for kids to apply to a whole bunch of colleges. It's super stressful colleges. So what do? They recycle their essays, right? Like my why I want to go to Columbia, my why I want to go to Stanford essays. I just took the same essay and then I just like removed all the proper nouns and replaced them with the ones from the other school, And so instead of writing a why I want to go to Chicago essay that was like cliche, like that was too much of everyone else's, what I did was I wrote them a letter. It was essentially a letter, and it started like, oh, to some this might sound like a love letter. And then in reality, it really is kind of like one, So it's kind of funny. So I just essentially wrote them like this love letter talking about like the different quirks and why I thought they were really, really great. And so like that was one thing that I did that like maybe made me a little bit different from all the other applicants. And then I remember I ended the letter, I don't know if you guys know, University of Chicago sends out a lot of mail compared to like the other top schools. Have you guys started getting like Chicago mail yet? Yeah, have you? So I ended it with like, oh, I really like a school that likes me back. And so thanks for sending me all that mail, Chicago. Like, I kept it, So like, I kind of like made these like funny little jokes, things that like it's like a little line, like some unique creative line that after the admissions officer reads it, he'll remember it. Like it doesn't matter what it says that much. I just made a joke about the mail, but it was kind of like unique. It's not something that everyone does. And so like you become, instead of 1 out of 10,000, maybe you're 1 out of 3 or 4. And then so like they'll remember your essay. So if what you put in your essay is good, suddenly you're into the college, like that, right? So it's really easy. And then the other thing that I did was pick the right school, and then pick a school that you really, really like. So the trend nowadays, and then I hear this a lot with my friends, they apply to like 30 different Ivies. All right, it's like 30 Ivies don't exist, but like 10 Ivies, and like 10 Ivies and then MIT, And then so like they apply to all these schools, and then like the big college admission day comes and didn't get into any of them. Like, why is that? Like, I only applied to one school and I got into it. And so, for me, I think a really big deal was I picked the school that I really, 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 really wanted to go to. And this was super important because, first, since I wanted to go to so much, I applied early. And I was able to start working on those essays earlier than everyone else. I was not as stressed about deadlines. I didn't have to work on the NYU essay at the same time as the Chicago essay, So I was able to sit down for 5 weeks, like every single day at a coffee shop and just write my essays. like over and over again, because I only had to worry about Chicago, right? They had their primary supplement essay. I don't know if you guys heard the prompt last year was Where's Waldo? It's like really weird, but I was initially going to do that. I wrote a bunch of essays on Where's Waldo. I didn't like any of them, so like 5 days before the application, since I didn't have to worry about any other deadlines, I just like scrapped everything that I'd written for the last 2 weeks and just started over and wrote a completely different essay on a different prompt. All right, so because I was able to apply early, because this is the only school I really, really want to go to, I was able to focus my efforts on that school. I was able to make my essays applicable to that school. Like my essays were kind of fun, were kind of like unique and creative, and that's what Chicago looks for. And so like I was able to tailor my essays to that kind of thing. And then, really important, put a lot of effort into your application, because what I found is like the kids who recycle their essays, the kids who like just like use some sort of like cliche template, or like who write about something that's not very interesting or creative, like you've worked so hard for 4 years. Like you put all that sweat, all that like lost sleep into your like into your studies. Why? Like it's for the simple reason of getting to college. The reality for most of you work hard because you get good grades so you can get into good college. Like it might vary a little bit from person to person, but that's the honest truth. And so you put 4 years of effort in, and you're gonna like procrastinate on that final thing that's gonna get you in. And that like if you're in a race, would you step on the brakes at the last second, right before you cross the finish line? No, you wouldn't, right? So you worked so hard for 4 years, why not put the extra effort in? I believe you should try really, really hard on your essays, because remember, college is going to be looking for your character. And there's no better way to show your character than through your essays. Because it's through your writing, you're able to communicate your thoughts. Instead of letting them infer your thoughts based on your extracurriculars or based on your grades, you can tell them what you want to tell them. And then if they read it and they connect with you, then you're into that college. And so those are the two things. Picking the right school is important. That doesn't mean you can't pick 10 Ivies, but out of those 10 Ivies, so I would strongly suggest you pick 1 or 2 of those schools that you really want to go into. So maybe you can hedge your bets and like apply to all 10 of your Ivies, but pick 2 schools that you really, really like. And find out why you really, really like them. All right, so that's important. Let's see if there's anything else that really I have to talk about. So yeah, that's essentially it. That's like the piece of narrow advice for you. It no longer works to apply to 10 schools, because remember all the friends that I was talking about that were really, really smart, that were all smarter than me, I thought, that inspired me to work hard? Those are the kids who applied to 10 Ivies because they had high expectations. They were like, I have a 4.0 GPA, I dance, I can, I don't know, I can speech and debate, I can do everything, and I'm pretty talented, and pretty qualified, so I'm going to go apply to UPenn, I'm going to apply Columbia, Princeton, Harvard, Brown, Yale, all of them. And because that way I'll have the chance of getting into one, and then guess what, you didn't get into any of them. So I think the biggest reason for that is because if they apply to that many schools, they don't have any school that they really want to go to. They don't have any ability to cater that particular school. Suddenly their essays, their like home stretch is not as strong as it could have been. And so that's the biggest reason why I think, even though my GPA was weak, weaker than a lot of my friends, I was able to like come out and I wasn't stuck going to like, so a lot of my friends are going to Berkeley because Berkeley is less holistic than other schools, but I was very lucky because I was a poor student at the beginning of my high school career, and I realized that maybe it wasn't too late. So that's about it. Before I go into questions, there's this one quote that I found today, and essentially like kind of sums up what I've been talking about. But it's like, for me, it's always been about like really hard work, or not always. For the last 2 years, it's been about really hard work. And so this is from an author called, his name is Dr. Samuel Johnson. He's a really famous writer. Well, he's from the 18th century. To be honest, even though I said he's really famous, I hadn't heard of him before I read this quote. But he said that what we hope ever to do with ease, we must first learn to do with diligence. And so like that's kind of the theme for today. With that, I'm just going to open it up to questions if anyone has any questions. We have like 20, 30 minutes for questions.
When did you take your SAT?
I took my SAT first time in sophomore year, second time in the beginning of senior year.
Oh, okay. So is the French AP hard? And then did you take it? French?
I didn't take French AP. So the thing about me is I actually think I'm really poor at learning languages. Maybe it's because I didn't put in effort, but even my English is not so good. Is that right? Okay. So even my English is not like amazing. So like I struggle with languages a lot. So Lynbrook's requirement is 2 years of it's 3 years of languages, but you can take 2 years in middle school, and I did take the 2 years in middle school, so I dropped the language after my second year because I was really struggling. Yeah, I told you I got a C in French the last semester, right? Yeah.
So for photography, did you go to any competition or something?
I did. I did. So the big competition that I participated in regularly, I participated all 4 years of my high school career, and this is through the photography club. So remember that Princeton teacher who's interested in photography? He's the one who arranged for all this. It's a regional contest called PGLGEF. It stands for like, I don't know what the P stands for. Something about like Los Gatos. Oh, Photographic Guild of Los Gatos. Yes, Photographic Guild of Los Gatos, and they host a regional photography contest every year. And so I got a really big ego boost because I kind of just like submitted for work the first year. I wasn't really expecting much. I was like a little freshman, and I took the first place prize in portraiture, the portraiture category. It was like that gave me a big ego boost. And that's probably one of the things that helped push me forward in terms of photography. But then the second thing.
When did you do that?
Freshman year. And I competed all 4 years. The second year I got second place in photojournalism. Third year I took a third place in photojournalism, and then fourth year, because it kind of looks bad because first, second, third. But in this year, senior year, I took first place in architecture, but I also won the best in show, which is like their big award. And then so throughout my 4 years, that's like about $1,500 in awards money. So like that helped fund my photography hobby in part. And then, yeah.
Can you talk about your photography class?
Oh,
last time and the next time.
Well, I teach a photography class here because like since this is my last year here, I don't have to like do anything too serious. I decided to get a job, and my mom helped find Sherry, who's allowing me to teach here. I teach a speech class, but then also teach a photography class. I think are we doing it 2 weeks from now? Yeah. So we have I'm teaching a photography class here if that's what you're interested in. It's very technical, but like it's important skills.
Yeah, you can find the students' portfolios. At the big.
Yeah. And then you can also find my portfolio in case you're interested. I have a website called frankwangdesign.com. I think parts of it might be down because my blogging service has like certain there's like website terms like CNAME and then A string configurations that are incorrect, and I haven't gone to like emailing them about that yet. But the work is up there if you're interested. And this is also one of those weird like little quirky things that like makes me different, because when I submitted my application, my email was my custom domain. So instead of something at gmail.com or like xoxokittyhearts at like gmail.com, I was frankwang at frankwangdesign.com. It's a little bit unique,
Yeah, just it's very impressive. That sounds like you are a very open-minded student. You open yourself to a lot of interesting things, and you want to explore and to learn. I just want to know at what point were you inspired to do some photography, and at what point of time, what inspired you to go to Yunnan and write the book, and you talk about because of you want to do donation to the school, and what really inspired you to do that? Because motivation is a big part of all you do.
Yeah. So the photography thing. It's kind of funny. Like it's hard to recall exactly why I started getting into photography. I remember we just had we had a point and shoot, and then one day I just went outside and took a couple pictures, and I thought it was okay. And I don't know why. Suddenly I started pressuring my mom to buy like a DSLR because one of the things I felt limited by using a small camera is you can't do things yourself. Like the camera makes all the decisions for you. So I thought it was super important that I can make my own decisions. I want to change the shutter speed. I want to change the aperture myself. Those are important to me. I want to learn what those terms mean. I want to know what the different lenses do, stuff like that. And then so I remember she bought the DSLR right before I entered high school. The summer before I entered high school, we went on a trip to the East Coast. We drove down, and I had a DSLR. I just took a lot of pictures. And then I always had this intention of making art as opposed to taking pictures of people or snapshots, that sort of thing. And so I guess part of it has to do with the fact that I had this inflated ego. I thought I was really good at it because I had a picture or two that were all right. And then of course looking back, I feel oh wow, I sucked back then. But then a lot of it has to do with positive feedback. When you think you're good at something, you like it more and you do it more. Yeah, it's essentially been that long road. Maybe I got lucky winning that photography contest. I know some of my friends who are actually very good photographers had a period of time where they're very discouraged because they didn't win that contest, even though it's very arbitrary. But it's hard to say. In terms of Yunnan specifically, I did those things because I thought they'd be fun. To be completely honest, it's not oh, I have to prove myself to someone. I have to do something cool. It's just simply because it sounds like fun. You're traveling to China, right? You're going to Hong Kong. Your parents are there. You're doing these new things. It sounds like fun, so why not? Why not go? Right?
Was it the family vacation?
No. Oh, to the East Coast?
Oh yeah.
Yes, that was.
To Yunnan.
Oh no, that wasn't. That was arranged by the organization that my friend helped found, Youth Impact International.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he invited me.
Yeah, why didn't you apply for Stanford, since you mentioned Stanford and Chicago, they both don't have scrutiny admission policy?
So in reality, that's one of my bigger regrets. my original plan, I had a list of 11 schools. Chicago, like I said, was the only one that was in the top 10 in terms of rankings. I was planning on applying like those liberal arts schools that most people haven't heard of. You know, like things like Williams is one of the good ones, but like schools like I don't know if you has anyone heard of Kenyon College? No. Oh, you've heard of Kenyon? I think it's a pretty cool school. I would have gone there. Or like schools like, you know, like the Claremont McKenna schools, for example, schools like that, like the small ones. And then my plan was to, if I got into Chicago early, I would drop all those schools, and then I would maybe apply to a couple like other top tier schools. And then I did get into Chicago early, so I ended up only applying to Tufts and NYU, which I both got into. But you know, like I submitted those applications before I got the EA decision. But then my biggest regret is when I picked the top schools to apply to. First of all, I was lazy because I was done with my applications. I didn't have to do it, right? I was already into a college. But then second, something about Princeton really, really appealed to me because I don't know if you can get this impression of me, but like I've always been kind of like somewhat like a pseudo-intellectual. Like I want to be like kind of intellectual. I like learning. I like academia, you know, like learning and like doing research and things like that. And so the fact that Albert Einstein came from Princeton, the fact that like Princeton's just like this little town that's really, really purely devoted to like study, like really appealed to me. So I applied to Princeton and I didn't get in. But then my biggest regret actually is not applying to Stanford as well. But part of it has to do with the fact that their application was long, and then I was like done with college, so like, you know, too much work. But yeah. Yeah.
Did some private counselor help you? Or?
I did hire a private. My parents hired a private counselor for me. So I don't know if you guys have heard, like, there's like counselors nowadays who charge like $25,000 for their package, you know. I'm sure you guys have all heard of that, right? So it's ridiculous. That's what I think too. I don't think that counselor got any better results than the kids would have gotten themselves. And the reason why you might think that they're very successful is because the counselors themselves pick the kids who get to counsel with them. So if they pick kids who are very smart, or very qualified, chances are the records that they're showing, oh, I got this many kids in Stanford, would have happened whether or not the kids went to the counselor, right? And so for me, I picked the counselor. Most of you probably haven't heard of her. What was her name? So I guess you can tell, like, she wasn't a huge deal to me, but the original intention was for her to suggest like small schools to me, because a lot of those like little liberal arts schools nobody has ever heard of. So she was the one who like helped me build my list because I had low expectations to begin with. Yeah, she cost like I think $2,000 for the whole package, $2,000. Yeah, and she would come to our house too, so it was really convenient. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the 3 point to prove on your junior and senior year. But those colleges won't look at your last year GPA, right?
Yeah, they don't. But regardless of the fact, I think my junior GPA was substantially better than my my sophomore or year 1, right? So it's like kind of like a surprise maybe. But then they do see your first semester grades, unless you apply EA. So this is one of the things that's a little bit surprising that I got in. I was surprised that I got an EA because they didn't see my semester 1 senior grades. But my intention was if you don't get an EA, you usually get deferred to like the regular action one. So in case they were really worried about my grades and they wanted to defer me, they would see my first semester senior year grades in the event that I got deferred. But I got lucky, I guess. I don't know. Hard to say. Yeah.
You stress a lot about prepare early for the application. When do you first started to prepare or even to look at the application to see what does it take?
So I think the definition of prepare early has changed a lot. This year I was talking to one of my friends who is also very ambitious about her college aspirations, and it turns out she started preparing her essay I think in December of last year. So I was like, wow, like I was still writing essays back then, right? And so I think that's a little bit extreme. For me personally, I was a procrastinator. If I had not gone into Chicago, I think I would have struggled a lot to get all my other applications out because I did procrastinate. But for me, the Chicago application and my UC application, I didn't start writing them early, but I started thinking a lot about perspective topics. And so my strategy for writing essays was I would think about a topic or like a certain approach to the essay prompt, and then I would come up with like whatever, like all these, I would make a list of all these random ideas, and I would try to write a couple sentences with those ideas. And it's not with the intention of putting them into an essay. I don't have to start from the beginning. I don't have to start from like the end. I just like write random sentences that come into my head, and then you kind of get a feeling for which ones you like and which ones are more genuine or more honest. I think I started my college apps I started thinking about them at the beginning of summer, but I didn't start writing my UC application until maybe mid-July, where I finished around like the beginning of August, and then I spent the rest of the time up until the Chicago EA deadline just purely working on Chicago essays. I didn't touch any of the other essays until then. And then, so essentially, let me see, that's about maybe 2 months working on the Chicago essays in advance. Yeah, but it was very like intensive. Like it wasn't like, oh, I was working on this for 1 day a week. It was like I would go to the coffee shop every single day and just sit down and do research on different like topics I thought were interesting and stuff like that.
But that's actual working.
So
That's actual working on the application. But when do you start like looking at what these colleges would ask applicants?
So let's see. That's a good question. Chicago, I think every year they come out with their application around now. I think it's a little like maybe like a little more than half a month ago they came out with this year's prompts. And so I was not obsessive enough about the school because I was still picking my school list to be the one to like check the Chicago application the day of that they came out. I think I looked at the Chicago application first, maybe in to be honest, probably around the same time I started working on them. But the UC applications, our school does, they provide the UC applications to us on the last couple of months of school. So you have those applications there, but to be honest, I didn't give them much thought until maybe like a month or two later. Yeah.
So back to your photography, when for all 4 years you are very interested in it, and usually how many hours would you spend on it despite your other busy life?
Well, that's kind of a hard question to answer because photography is not really like, oh, I can sit down and study and like I want to put 2 hours into this every week, right? It's more like as an opportunity comes up, you take that opportunity, you go and take pictures and stuff. I think it'd be fair to say, first of all, that the frequency of my photography visits has gone down over time. Partially it's because I have higher standards. Like for my own work, I don't like sometimes I look outside. It's like today's just not a good day. Like I'm not gonna get any good pictures no matter what, so I don't go out to take pictures that day. But then initially, I think I would go out to like Santa Cruz or like you know like areas around here that are kind of scenic and take pictures maybe every on average maybe every 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it would take like one evening. So maybe 4 or 5 hours that evening. But then I also had yearbook starting sophomore year, which allowed me, like essentially it was a demand on me because I had to go take pictures for yearbook. And then, so I would go to like sports games, I would go to football games, I would go to like, you know, volleyball games or like, you know, different school events and take pictures for them. And that might take around, I imagine it took me around like 3.5 hours a week, maybe 4 hours a week. It's not a huge liability, but it's hard to say how much time I wasted or like spent like doing things like editing my pictures or like reading about random photography stuff online or like, you know, looking at other photographers' work.
Do you have some coach to help you?
No, I'm completely self-taught. I self-taught myself using resources online.
Oh,
so like
okay.
yeah, but it's because I'm like in terms of like if I'm passionate about something, I think I'm the kind of person who's driven to like learn about things I like.
Oh, I
so
see.
Yeah.
So this a guild club or the guild club or something you mentioned, does that provide extra, not really help, but create an environment for you to and get
don't.
friends? No.
So it's a good question. I can't really answer. If you were to ask what the guild is, I can't really answer because I think it's a collection of old people. Like they're really, really old, more senior citizens who like have like a passion for photography, and they kind of arranged this like youth contest for us. So it's not like I'm not actually a member of the guild because it's like everyone in the guild is like over the age of 65.
Oh.
But it's just a contest that they host. There is a photography club at our school, and then I didn't take that seriously until sophomore year. Let's see. So sophomore year, I served as both the secretary and the treasurer of the photography club, and then senior and junior year, I served as the vice president because there was friends of mine who had been in the club longer. They got the president's spot, but that probably took me about like maybe, well, besides the lunch hours, like half an hour to prepare for meetings every week on average. So it doesn't take a huge amount of time. But I did not have like a great deal of external resources besides the internet.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So it doesn't really have a sponsored teacher that gives you.
This is an advisor because every club at Lynbrook is required to have an advisor. And like I mentioned, our advisor is Mr. I am to teach statistics, and he worked at KPMG. He graduated from Princeton, but he's also very passionate about photography, so he's our advisor.
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Was there any more questions? I'm sorry.
From the parents' perspective, right? I like to talk a little bit more about your parents. I think you didn't come across your parent has too much influence on your development.
Actually, I think my parents are. That's a good question. I haven't not given that a huge amount of thought. So, I don't know if she's outside. So, the first thing about my parents, like I told you about how like they tutored me when I was a kid. They pushed me a lot when I was a kid. But one of the reasons I think I'm really logically curious is because as a kid, my dad really liked to ask me logic puzzles, right? So, I was meeting with Jimmy the other day, and then he was giving me logic puzzles, and he was much better at solving them than me. But essentially, my dad used to just ask me questions like, oh, like if you had like the wolf, the cabbage, the man, like how do you get all three of them across the river without like the wolf eating the sheep, and then like the sheep eating the cabbage? Questions like that, like that kind of like get you thinking about creatively. And so I really, really enjoyed questions like that. So I imagine like that part of them, it was probably just for fun, but like that part of me, the part of me that appreciates like creative solutions, probably comes from like being exposed to those problems from an early age. The other thing about my parents, like I mentioned how like they were very supportive of me when I started like getting passionate about photography and design. But I do remember a time, especially at the beginning of my high school, when I had a lot of stress between my parents mostly because of my bad grades. And they would always push me, and I'd be like, Mom, I'm trying as hard as I can. I just can't do it. I'm just not a test-taking person. I'm just not a school kind of person. And then so I think for the most part, they gave up on me around the end of sophomore year or like the middle of sophomore year. They're just like, oh, I'm just gonna let him do his thing, you know. And then I kind of found my own win again. But then it's also very nice because my parents noticed. Like, they suddenly noticed that I was studying hard, and I was like, you know, I was getting better grades and things like that. And then so from that point on, they've always been like, I mean, it's always nice to know that like if you're trying something really hard, your parents notice or someone notices. And then, well, the funny thing is my parents always used to be like, I think they were preparing me for the crushing feeling of like getting rejected from those schools when all my parents were going. So I remember them like consoling me, like, oh, if you don't get into college today, it's like, it's okay. Like, there's always those other opportunities in the future, right? And I honestly believe that. So it's easy because for a lot of people, if you look at yourself and you're behind everyone else, it's very difficult to get started. And I know that for a fact, but I have another friend, so all these friends of mine, his name is Jonathan Usato, and then he's one of my role models in terms of this, and then like, it's a little bit in hindsight, but like, he has gotten into a lot of different hobbies. He's also very intelligent. He was, I don't remember anything specific about him, but you can take my word for it when you say he's very intelligent. He's going to MIT, he's also gone to Yale, essentially, he has adopted several hobbies in which he has friends that are very, very good at them, but he himself is just getting started. Things like computer science, I think he was more recent than some of you guys, right? And then photography, like he's just getting started in these hobbies, but all his friends are very good at these things, and so like, I really admire him because he's able to like, he doesn't care much about his image, about how the fact that he's not quite as good as everyone else. He just like worries about his own thing, he does his own thing, and he like tries to make something better. And so my parents always pushed me in the way, like, they told me that, oh, like, it's okay if you don't get into a good undergraduate college. Like, study hard through your, you know, like, whatever school you go to, you'll go to a better graduate school. And then you'll always, like, it doesn't matter what school you go to in terms of, like, your future, in terms of how much money you can make, how happy you can be. And, like, the thing is, I actually, like, always very honestly believed them. Like, even though I would have been upset at the fact that, like, maybe my friends were going to better schools than me, things like that. But my parents were always there in terms of, like, I think they were always looking out for me in the long run. It's not about like the narrow getting to college thing. It's always just about like my happiness in general. So like I'm really thankful to them for that. Like I think it's like a good way to approach your kids. Like, they gave me a lot of freedom, and so like I was able to figure out a lot of my problems myself. And then so I have like certain values that you don't always come across in other friends. Like there are a lot of kids who like are motivated to work hard by themselves, who are like motivated to like, you know, like who are like self-curious, like they look out for their own futures and stuff like that. And I wasn't like that, but I think the fact that I was able to figure that out on my own, as opposed to having my parents like force that upon me, like made me a better, more stronger person in the long run. Yeah.
One question about Berkeley. You mentioned very briefly about Berkeley being a holistic school.
It's not quite as holistic.
Oh, can you expand on that a little bit?
So I mentioned how like holistic evaluation is where they look at your application as a whole. They look at your GPA, your SAT, they look at your extracurriculars and like your essays and everything. So apparently, that's actually my mom, guys. That's my mom. Okay, so when I mentioned holistic evaluation, the UC system has a much less holistic process. I think primarily due to the cost of having everyone read essays over and over again. They have much stricter thresholds in terms of minimum GPA, minimum SATs, and things like that. And so this is actually to be expected. In terms of my UC results, I did not get into Berkeley. I did not get into UCLA. I was waitlisted at San Diego and Davis. And I did not get off the wait list. Actually, I didn't even apply to be on the wait list, just kidding. So it's hard to say. But like, as you can see, like, I think it's primarily because my GPA was weak. And like, since they're less holistic, they're less likely to look at your essay and your other things like that. So.
Oh, that's what you mean. But Stanford, for example, is a holistic.
Much more holistic. All the private schools are very holistic, in my opinion.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. How did you get your good friends? Is it just randomly, or you pick them, or?
Okay, that's interesting too. So, that's a very difficult question to answer. So the friends that I have that are like good grades and they're fairly smart, I think I made, some of them were family friends. So my parents are friends with the parents of this girl named Irene. Her name is Irene Sue. And then, so like, she's a member of this group of friends who's like fairly, like, they're pretty studious, they have like strict parents and things like that. And so since I was like kind of familiar with Irene, I had a crush on her a while back. So I spent a lot of time with her. And then so like that made me friends with like her friends, and like that kind of like trickled down. But then the other thing is like making those really smart friends, like the really exceptional kids, that came from a couple of things. It's first that I was interested in something, and I could like talk to them about like interesting, even though I got bad grades. Like since I was okay at Clinton, I could talk to Eric, I could talk to Jeff, you know. Or like Eric and I, when we were talking about like the whole Princeton and the advanced logic class, that same day we sat down and we talked for I think 3 hours about like what string theory means for like multiple universes, and like whether it's reality if you have like a brain in a vat that's just being chemically stimulated and things like that. Like these big questions, since I'm interested in them, I've always been able to talk to people about them. And it's because I care about like politics and like current events and things like that. There's always like something to talk about with these like very intelligent people. Even though they all have like more skills than me and they all have like better grades than me and things like that. If we have something to talk about, you can become friends. But then the other thing is like I think I'm really good at pretending to be smart. So even if I'm not, like I deceive myself into thinking I'm really smart for like a lot of years, and then suddenly I have like this like pin in the balloon, like pop, the ego goes down. Moment, but like the whole time since I can pretend to be smart and I can convince other people I'm smart, like you just like keep quiet about the GPA for a while until they're your friends, and then you can tell them about it, that sort of thing. It's important to respect people who are smart, and then if you respect them and then you put the effort into that friendship, they will notice and they will be, they'll be willing to be your friends.
Are your friends all Chinese then?
No, they're not all Chinese, and that and even though they are primarily Chinese, it's not Chinese.
All Chinese.
I think it's not good to jump to the conclusion that it's because Chinese people are smart, even though like maybe statistically they're pretty strong in this area. The biggest reason why most of my friends are Chinese is because most people at my school are Chinese. So even though I was friends with like people who aren't smart, they would still be Chinese and Indian. I have a couple of friends who are not Chinese, who are also very, very smart people. There's one kid named Jack Takahashi. At times he can be a really big pain. Okay, he's like sometimes he's really annoying, but he's going to Stanford. He was an Intel finalist, so top 10 I think that means. And then so he's half Japanese, half white. And then let's see, anyone else that comes immediately to mind? No. There are people that I'm friends with, that I am chill with, that are not friends. Especially because like a lot of people who are like not Asian who I respect a lot. There's one kid named Kyle Williams who's attending West Point, and then he's always been like he's a white kid whose parents are all military background, but like you can always tell he's like a very strong, like like independently minded, like independent kind of person. Like you respect people like that for them, even though I was not able to make friends with them. But even though most of my friends were Chinese, or like Asian or like Indian, that's not necessarily because they're smarter, inherently smarter. It's primarily because 80% of my school is Asian.
But do you feel more comfortable making friends with Asian than rather with say Caucasian, or if you had the opportunity?
I think it's interesting because none of us, like, especially coming from here, like especially in high school for the younger folks, you don't hear much about racism. Like we're all very, very liberally minded because we grew up in California, we grew up in the Bay Area, the gay rights and like abortion and all like are pretty like one-sided issues here, right? But then so for me, it's interesting because I honestly think I would be more comfortable around Asian kids, even though like it's not like I would assume that Asian kids are better or like Asian kids are more like friendly or whatever. It just happens to be like maybe it's a cultural thing, maybe it's genetics. Like maybe you're just like inclined to be more friendly with people if you're like with similar traits and stuff like that. The honest truth is I'm probably more comfortable with Asian kids, but I don't think that's a good reason to stop you from like looking for friendships in other places too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you share your experience to sell your book and raise the money?
Okay, so
How people trust you to buy your book?
that was a really good experience. Actually, so I mentioned it was the Hong Kong book fair, right? The whole book was produced in 10 days, which is amazing, I think. It was like so tiring. We stayed up for 2 nights straight, and we just drank an enormous amount of coffee to stay awake to finish the book so that it could be sent to the press. And then so when we started selling the book, okay, before I talk about that, there was an article that I read where like it was like some word of advice that everyone should at some point in their lives get a job as a telemarketer. And then the reason for that is if you call people all day and it's your job to get rejected by people on the phone, and like you will never be afraid to call anyone ever again. Or you'll never be afraid to talk to someone who might give you an opportunity. And I thought that made a lot of sense. And so I'm not going to get a job as a telemarketer because that's really scary, okay? But the thing about selling the book in Hong Kong was we were asked to go around to random strangers and just ask, is it okay if we talk to you a little bit about this book? And then I think most people bought it because they felt guilty that we talked to them for so long and like they weren't buying the book. But like at the same time, a lot of people said no. And some of them were kind of cold-hearted. Some people were kind of mean. They just like don't say anything to you. Like they just ignore you and they walk away. And then part of it, like part of that whole experience is like learning to deal with that kind of thing. You know, there was a white boy on our trip. So essentially, like one spot for the trip was reserved for someone who won an award in a writing contest. And so that guy's name was Liam, and he was from Buffalo, New York. So it's really interesting that I know him because he's actually a very interesting like kid as well. It's interesting to think about like how his culture is different there. Like drinking was a big scene there. So I remember in Hong Kong when we were talking to each other, I was really surprised that like he could be like, wow, like they drink and they're so young. You know, like they have parties and they drink and they do stuff like that. But then like at the same time, it's one of the things that made me more open-minded because we all have these preconceived notions that drinking is super bad. And I still think that drinking is not something you guys should do when you're under the age of 21. But at the same time, it's important not to jump to conclusions about a person's character. So even if you think that drinking is bad and this person does a bad thing perceivably, it doesn't mean he's a bad person. So Liam is actually one of the very talented, like individual-minded people that we know. He grows up in a very different environment from us. But at the same time, I think it's really cool that we were able to become friends. That we're able to like kind of like learn to understand each other because we grow up in this like little bubble here, right? Like this Bay Area, we're very sheltered kind of bubble, and then suddenly like we have this guy from Buffalo, New York, who has like more black friends than I know black people, you know. So like that's one of the big factors. And the last thing is kind of funny, but they made us like essentially we were walking around trying to sell our book. They made us dress up in these like ridiculous Tibetan outfits. And so like that was another part of like the whole dealing with like embarrassing situations or like dealing with rejection or like that sort of thing. Like don't worry so much about the impression of other people on you, just worry about your own thing. Like do your own thing right and then one day people will take notice. Yeah.
So people arranged the Hong Kong press or Hong Kong book fair and the press for you, or you had to seek out yourself?
Matthew's father, Matthew, this guy who founded the organization, has a family in Hong Kong that own a portion of a publishing company, and so we were able to get a spot in the Hong Kong Book Fair. Yeah.
Okay, Frank mentioned many times his father, mother, his parent, house support. This is a mother. So
yeah, I mentioned that earlier. Like we already gave her a round of applause. I bought her flowers for Mother's Day. You know.
Do you have questions for the mother?
What's questions for the
yeah,
mother?
can the mother stand with the son and maybe I can
I'm
take
not
picture
prepared.
for you?
I'm not prepared for that.
You can ask me questions too.
Yeah,
just
sure.
ask questions. So,
it's better you stand up. I can take picture for you.
How do you realize that?
Well, I mean, the fact that my friends were getting A's and I was getting B's is like one big indicator. Another is just I wasn't very happy in general about like, you know, not, because, okay, like for example, I was always sit in class with these smart kids. I remember in chem class, I sat next to a girl named Stacy, and then she has like this super like tiger mom who makes her study really hard, and then she's like a little bit shallow, in terms of like what she cares about. Like she doesn't care much about the things I talked about, but like at the same time she gets good grades, right? So like it's very, very deflating. Every single time you get a test back, it's like Dr. Rockland goes up, wow, Stacy, you did such a good job. Like Dr. Rockland is our chem teacher. He loves Stacy. I think you got the second highest grade in all my classes. And then just puts my paper on the table and just walks away. You look at it, it's like, oh, like 81% or like a 78%. Like, oh no, not again. Like, so Stacy's over here like with her like 106% in her class, and I'm here with like 83% in the class. So it just doesn't feel very good. So in general, you know that you're not quite doing as well as Stacy next to you. And so like, especially coming from a school that's really competitive, I'm really glad I went there because since first of all everyone's competitive, you have to compete with them as well. And the second thing is, I'm really thankful that I went to a school that doesn't prosecute being smart. So you hear, for example, like if you were to go to like some slum school in Chicago, if you were the smart kid in the class, you get beat up and like get your head stuffed in the toilet. And then so like that sort of thing is like at Lynbrook, or at least around this area, being smart is always something that's really respected. And then so like since I respect those people who are very smart as well, I think I really strive to like try to become more like them. Yeah.
So how much sleep did you get during your high school?
So not as much as I would like. In reality, so let's see, freshman, sophomore, junior year were kind of tough for me. Towards the end of junior year, things got easier for me because I got my study habits improved. And if I were to stay up, it wasn't because I had to, even though that's what I told my mom. Usually, like, so I recall on average I would go to bed between 12 and 1 o'clock every night, and then I would get up. Depending on the year, because sometimes I had a first period, sometimes I didn't. I'd get up between 6:30 or 7:30, depending on the year. And then so like it's not a lot of sleep, as you can tell, but I took a lot of naps. So like word of advice for people going to college, going to high school, and I'm presuming going to college, naps will save your life. So like take a lot of naps. It's like 20 minutes, right? And then you have to develop this the self-control to get out of bed after 20 minutes. But if you do, you'll feel groggy at first, but after 10 minutes you'll feel amazing. And then in another 2 hours, maybe you'll feel super tired again, but then by that time you can go to bed, So sleep was, I had friends with sleep problems worse than me, so I was not the worst out there, but it would have been nice to get more sleep. Towards the end of senior year, you develop these habits and like sleeping patterns that like, even though you have nothing to do, you still don't want to sleep at like 11 o'clock. So it's like 11 o'clock, but like, if I were to go to bed right now, I wouldn't be able to fall asleep. So I just end up doing something else, and then like, yeah. So it's probably not good for me, but everyone goes through it, so. And then like I remember, so it's also interesting because I remember middle school, sleep was one of the things everyone would worry like middle schoolers about going to high school. Another thing was that like huge amounts of work, and so it's really intimidating. Like, and I'll be honest with you, like going through high school is pretty difficult. Especially like, you hear reputations about junior year being hell, and they're like, oh gosh, like what am I going to do to get through this? And then it sounds terrible, and then the reality is it is terrible, but it's never so bad that, first of all, it's never so bad that you can't handle it. So it's always handleable. Like you're amazed, like you push yourself to new limits, but then like in reality, you always make it there. And there's like no serious trouble in terms of getting it there. And the second thing is it's never as bad as you think. And that includes like the sleeping question. So like, you always sleep a little more than like, so when people say they pull all-nighters, what they really mean is they slept for 4 hours. They say they slept for 4 hours, what they really mean is they slept for 7 hours. Everything gets a little bit exaggerated in the process, yeah.
Do you think you guys really need that long to study, or just because you do something else?
So do you want me to answer this honestly?
Yeah.
So, I think it probably doesn't take that long to study. But it also probably takes more time to study than you think. So, because one part of high school is the procrastination. Like, honestly, I feel like high school would not quite be the same if I were as like super productive the whole time. Like, it would kind of take the life out of like the whole thing. Like, part of like me bonding with friends is we'd be online and chatting each other when we're supposed to like be studying for A-push. And we kind of be studying for A-push at the same time. But like, it's just like these late nights, like where everyone's about to fall asleep and you're all kind of studying. Like, this is all kind of a part of the culture. So like everything else, like anything you don't take to the extreme is not inherently bad for you. And it's like good to try like different experiences. Like, it's like you can perceivably consider like procrastination or like unproductivity one of those things. But it's good to get into good productive habits. Like senior year, I do understand that I became much more productive in terms of like my time efficiency. But what I realized is for, especially the people who are very intelligent, when they have more time, they don't need to study, they don't sleep more. Like maybe it's because they had bad habits from like sophomore and freshman year, but instead of sleeping, they go and they learn their own things. They go read their own articles, we share articles between each other, and we use huge amounts of like non-academic time, just like doing our own thing and learning our own skills and like trying to develop and discuss and like doing like interesting things that have like some sort of depth and stuff. So, like the really exceptional people, that's what they really do. That's something that I've been trying to like hit myself because I'm still getting there. And I'm trying to teach myself computer science. So I'm taking classes at like Code Academy. Like there's like these online classes. I'm trying to teach myself. I'm trying to go through calculus again to like review all my concepts in calculus. But like I mentioned, like right now I'm trying to derive all the the calculus equations by myself, like Newton would have done it himself, like without looking at any proofs online. I don't always succeed, right? But like it's just like some of the things that I'm trying to do myself, as opposed to having someone impose that upon me. Yeah, and I kind of got off topic there. Sorry. Hope I kind of answered your question. Yeah.
So the parents should probably turn off the internet access so that you cannot get on Facebook.
The reality is it's very difficult to do your homework without internet nowadays. So internet, yeah. And then, I mean, it's something that people, I think, will learn themselves over time. Like, if you are motivated to do well in certain things, you'll naturally be inclined to, like, focus more on the things that matter to you. So I don't think turning off Facebook inherently works, because whenever my parents used to do that, I used to get really angry at them and just pressure them until they turned it back on.
Wait, we never do that.
Okay. Sometimes you guys pull the internet. Dad always pulled the internet, okay? But the thing is, what I found for me is if I get into like something that I enjoy, and this is not everything academic, even though I like learn good study habits in terms of like my history classes, stuff like that, like my count classes, doing homework on time and doing them well. So those things aren't always things that I enjoy, but at the same time, when I do something that I enjoy in terms of like, it's usually something academic too, like I don't know if it's like learning to code or like building my own website and that sort of thing. If you're enjoying it, you don't feel any need to go onto Facebook. Like I just don't go onto Facebook, and like my friends are chatting me, and I used to be the kid who would not do my homework. I would chat with my friends instead, and I would always realize, shoot, I forgot to reply to him. I forgot to reply to him, and you realize like they sent you the message 3 hours ago, you forgot to reply to them because you're so engaged in whatever else you were doing. Like it's best to hit that stride. Like everything, I'm pretty libertarian in terms of I think like freedom in general is good, and then like kids hopefully will learn themselves that like there's certain ways to do things that are always better. I think there was a study recently about how productivity in the workforce, in the workplace, actually goes up if you allow employees to like do their own things as well during work hours. So if it's like okay for the employee to check Facebook every now and then, it's okay for employees to like check their email or send an email to like in terms of personal business every now and then. And then apparently the study says, I haven't read the study, but apparently the study says that productivity actually goes up because of that. And I don't know if that has anything to do with students and studying, but like inevitably students will procrastinate, and inevitably they'll get distracted. But hopefully as they grow up, like they'll learn that like there's things that they should probably care a lot about, and then those things will seem bigger than like going on Facebook every 10 minutes. You know, like there are probably times where you should probably turn off Facebook. So if it's like 3 in the morning and like there's still like you can still hear them like typing on the keyboard, maybe it's time to like pull the plug on the internet. But like in general, I don't think it should be like strict and enforced. Like it's always like exceptions to the rules, you know.
Do you guys use the internet or use Facebook or use chat to do homework, to discuss homework at this hour? Or usually when I see kids on Facebook, it's not work.
Usually you're right. Usually you are right. But sometimes you are not. So I remember chem, I got a lot of help from my friends in terms of like I would ask them like how to do this chem problem online, and they would struggle to explain it to me through like text or like a little chat box. And that's like occasionally those things do exist, not always, not usually. Usually it's like something completely irrelevant. But at the same time, like I said earlier, that's actually like part of like the whole experience. Like all the kids who I know, like most of them didn't have those strict enforcements of those rules, and then like actually putting those like strict rules down could probably jeopardize their friendships to a certain extent. Because like I mentioned earlier, like part of my experience growing up, part of the way I bonded with my friends was, dude, oh my god, it's 4 a.m. we're still doing A push, and I would just chat my friends because I was so tired of A push. But then like so like if it weren't for that, like I would lose certain things that I have with my friends now. And like I mentioned, friendships are very important. So it's I don't know, it's like I said, like it's like a case-by-case basis. In general, I prefer I think like being liberal and like free is a good thing. And then there's always those scenarios where you just have to pull the plug. But like those are rare.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm looking out for you guys, okay? This is for you.
And are you comfortable to share you mentioned your essays, the PDF?
I am comfortable. So right now I have friends who are asking me. if you guys
right now.
Yeah, if you guys are interested, you guys can always email me for them.
Okay.
I have friends who ask me for my essays, and I send them to all of them. Because well, I mean, so there's a couple of things. First, right now, like I'm done with my essays, and then so, like it doesn't matter so much. But then at the same time, since I work so hard on them, they're actually things that I'm pretty proud of. It's like because I put a lot of myself into them. Like it helped me grow up a lot because like you're forced to think about yourself. You're forced to think about your own character and things like that. And then besides that, like after spending so many hours on them, like I think they're pretty good because I work so hard. And then the other thing is my advice for people who are applying to college soon. A lot of my friends have this philosophy where they wouldn't share their essays to people. And then part of it I think is motivated by the fact they might be embarrassed because they talk about personal things, right? The other thing is like, well, at least what they tell me is that too many people reading your essays, they give you different advice and you don't know which one to take. But for me, I always ask a lot of people to read my essays. I asked like the Liam kid in New York to read my essay. I asked Eric to read my essay. I asked Jonathan Usado to read my essay. I asked my counselor to read my essay. Did I ask you to read my essay?
No.
No, okay. I asked all my friends to read my essay though, like all the friends that I respect the most especially. And because my philosophy is, even though sometimes they'll give you contradictory advice, if you have all the options on the table, you always have the power to pick which one is best. Like which one is best to you, which one is most applicable to you. It's kind of like government. Like I don't know if like the American government system works by putting all the ideas in the middle, and we talk about it and we decide which one is best. It's called pluralism. And so like I guess I have a very pluralist view in terms of like my essays. So if you guys want to read my essays, if you guys want to write this down, my email is frankwang at frankwangdesign.com, and it's spelled how. Like, do you guys need me to write it down?
No.
All right.
Yes, I need.
FRANK. Here, actually, let's see.
I will put it
Alright, sure. I'll put it up in a second, yeah. Or actually, you can reach me at fkwang at uchicago.edu as well. I just got that email. That's exciting. Yeah.
Regarding that essay, I want to say
this one is
one thing. Is a counselor.
Anyone have any questions? I can answer a question while I write this.
Regarding his idea. But he never wants me to read that, right? So the counselor actually share a few sentences, just give me a few sentences from that. So you know, just say he's ready, he has something.
It doesn't matter. I think emails are not case sensitive. Yeah. Wang, not a space, at Frank Wang Design.
I guess a question for the mom, though, how did you prepare your kid when he was young? Did you set up a lot of classes for him? Did you have him go to different extracurricular to fulfill his, because he's a very curious person, so how did he get his curiosity from?
Well, since he's the eldest one, right, my first kid, and actually when he was very young, I'm kind of like, really wants to take him. You know, when he just turned three and a half, I just, finally you can start learning something. So I started sending him to like group piano class or drawing class. Actually,
I think my mom had me like try a lot of different things when I was a kid.
But after that, actually, I don't think that's really necessary. I think it's as a parent, the most important thing is expose more, but don't force them to like say, you have to be excellent here and there. But if only they show the interest, we always try our best to support. Like say after he started loving photography, you know, even as 3 o'clock in the morning, and he wants to take the sunrise.
My dad would drive me to Santa Cruz to take pictures of so like the stars at night. Even though like he would have to stay up till like 3 a.m. Like,
oh my gosh.
Yes, I love my dad.
That's the thing we can do, right?
Now I can drive there myself. So.
I think that's
no, I have a little brother, but he came 5 years after me. And I think he's doing much better than I was doing, so everything's gonna be okay.
For example, how many years did you push Frank to learn piano?
I didn't push him that much, right? Actually, Frank, he got the 10, after he earned the 10th.
Like the CM level 10, I stopped.
Level 10,
because I was not
because I spent more time on
able to like study or like practice.
I never tried to say, you have to achieve this and that. If he wants to stop, I don't think I'll just say, you already spent this many time on it. Do you really want to stop? Usually after he think about that, he doesn't want to play. The kids themselves, unless they really doesn't like it. Some kids really doesn't enjoy it. And for example, in class saying he tried. You really want to stop. I think it's better just have them stop.
What?
Because they don't have the
freshman year, I think, 9th grade. I did very, very bad. So the reality is they don't care that much about how well you do. I remember I practiced, you practice a long time for the pieces because they're fairly difficult, but then I practiced all the time. I spent all the time memorizing them, and then when I went in to take my playing test, I forgot the piece of the hat like in the middle. It was awful. And then like I just like kind of started from some random place and I kind of stumbled around. I was like really nervous. And then I kept making mistakes, so I was nervous. I was like, there's no way I passed. And then like a week or two later, I was like, I passed. Like I don't know how I did that, but you know, I made it. Maybe like they switched the applications or something. Some like poor guy got my application and didn't pass. Yeah.
So you are a confident speaker. How did you train yourself, or it's by nature?
I think it's because since I was growing, like I've always had like this kind of like inflated ego. Like I never. Well, I mean, like, it's kind of gone down a little bit, but ever since I was a kid, I just kind of assumed people like me, even though, like, maybe they didn't, and even though they probably didn't. But, so, since I was always fairly confident, and I always had, like, these ideas, like, whenever I would have some ideas, I would, like to express them, because, so first of all, like, they're usually ideas that people don't always care to think about, and second of all, because I feel like I had, like, this personal, subconscious need to prove that I was smarter than everyone else, even though in reality I probably wasn't. But so, like, for example, like in class, if we're starting to learn about the Revolutionary War, I remember in like 3rd or 4th grade, I had read all that stuff way before because I just thought it was kind of cool to read about war and stuff like. But suddenly I was like, oh no, like all these kids, they're gonna know the same thing as me. Like they're catching up to me, you know. So I felt this need, for example, in class to like talk and be like, oh yeah, I totally knew that already. So I would like say things before, like we read it in the book and things like that. So like I've always been like kind of, maybe it's like delusional in terms of like. Whether people really like me or not. I've never worried about people not liking me until recently, but by then everything had already been established. I was confident enough to like go and like do like speech and debate, and that sort of thing like kind of drills your like technique, like enunciating your words, and then like you know. Like being able to just talk about random things like without having a script. Like I wasn't reading a script today, even though I planned to. In reality, I didn't really follow my note cards, you know. So it's like that sort of thing just like comes with practice, and then like you know, it's like a confidence thing.
Did you go to any public speaking, you know, training or class or something?
I did. When cause I don't know if I mentioned. I think I did a little bit of speech and debate in middle school. And then so like before high school, I had kind of like was intent on doing speech and debate. I think it's because I watched like one of their demonstration debates. Wow, it's so cool how they just like argue and they talk so fast and they're so fluid even though they didn't have something to go off of. And then so I took a speech camp, which I thought was kind of useless, to be honest. We did some really
your public speaking class?
It's up to the kids. I think it's a little better. And
he has a student here. Dorian,
yeah.
What do you think of his class? Do you like his class?
Yeah.
So, like, because the thing about public speaking is it's really vague, right? So you can work on things like technique. You can say tongue twisters. You can like practice drills, like using like outlines to give like full speeches and things like that. But at the very core, it's up to yourself, right? It's up to your confidence. It's up to your like ability to think of words. And it's up to like your, you know, your willingness to go up and talk. I think it's a really big proportion of it. And so, if you don't feel that motivation yourself, it's really hard to push someone to do the right thing. I mean, whereas like math, even if they hate math, you can kind of just like make them do the problems and kind of just like explain the problems to them. But like speaking debate in general is kind of like a vague, up in the air sort of thing. So it's like kind of self-taught, and then like the mentors like give you a nudge in the right direction along the right way, which is why I thought it was kind of useless. Cause yeah.
So next week, not the day after tomorrow, the week 26 to 22 to 26, the week. The morning, Frank will teach the photography class, and in the afternoon is a public speaking class.
It's really tiring.
Yeah, the public speaking class. The purpose is not for the competition. Can you promote your class?
The speaking class? Yeah. So the speaking class, well, it's really interesting. So Doreen was in my first class, the first class that I taught. And to be honest, and this is kind of flattering you, but that was the class I enjoyed teaching the most because all the kids were somewhat mature. Like I think they're all going into high school, you know. One kid was going to senior year the next year. And then so like, first of all, like if you told them to do something, they would give it a little bit of effort, you know, they would care a little bit. And beyond that, if you like show speeches about like famous people talking, they usually would at least understand the speeches, even if you can't get them to care about them. So after that, I had 2 weeks of much younger kids, and they actually got younger and younger as time went on. So the last class I think was the hardest one to teach because they were so young. And so at that point, since I mentioned earlier, like, which is kind of like a self-motivated thing, where you have to have, like, it's like kind of like, it's very hard to just explain or, you know, tell them to do something and they'll do it. It's not really like that. So, especially with younger kids, it's hard to make them do things like that. So, like, if you tell them to go up to give a speech, they'll give a speech, but they'll be like, oh, well, first, my greatest weakness is something, and then they'll give you like 2 sentences and just like stand there, I don't know what to say next. And then they'll just stand there for a minute and a half because I told them to talk for 2 minutes, right? But then so like with older kids, at least they'll try, you know, like usually they'll try, so teaching older kids is fun, but with my classes in general, I try to do like, usually I do a cycle of things. So first, since Sherry asked me to do more writing in my classes, I began requiring them to write a research paper. You guys are lucky you guys didn't have to do that. So it's like a week-long like research paper where like you pick a topic and then you just like write some sort of like argumentative paper over a week. And like the little kids would do that. So that was always a portion of the class that would work. And then the second thing was I like to show them speeches, and then like depending on their age, I'll show something like maybe less serious, more serious, like something that hopefully they'll like kind of identify with. And then I did a lot of like reading of like pre-written passages with their class, but I found that sort of thing doesn't work very well with younger kids because they'll just read it and they don't like put any effort in terms of like improving the way they read it. So so my recent revelation is that with the little kids, what you do is like one-on-one time. So it's like, oh, in order to improve your speech reading, I stand in front of them and I tell them, so you're going to read this paragraph first. And then you're going to like look at me every sentence, you know, like look up every sentence. You're not going to wiggle around. You're not going to like sway back and forth, that sort of thing. It's kind of like how you teach little kids to play piano versus how you teach big kids to play piano.
How little? What is that?
So the kids I taught last week were they're 2 incoming 5th graders, 1 incoming 6th grader, and
1 is incoming 5th grade.
Yeah, 2 incoming 5th grade.
The first class is
1 incoming 6, 1 incoming 7.
The 7th class is middle school.
Elementary school.
That's too young. Like I mentioned earlier, Doreen's class was 3 incoming 9th graders and 1 incoming senior. Yeah.
But I think they still learn something.
Still learn something.
So like, I feel bad for like the kids, the younger kids in my 2nd class because I didn't figure out how to deal with them yet. But then hopefully like next time will be better because like I kind of, you know.
So could you please share your schedule? For public speaking class, your schedule.
So let's see. Usually the first day you have to introduce them to things like the research paper, right? I'll usually tell them about the research paper. Depending on like the day, I'll make them give what's called an impromptu speech, is where I give them some random topic and they interpret it however they want and they come up here and they talk. And this is once again something that little kids tend to struggle, tend to struggle a lot with. But then it's also, in my opinion, the most important part of impromptu speaking. It's like thinking on your feet. It's kind of like freestyle rapping or some sort of thing like that, where you have to like, you know, come up with your own words without reading, right? And then so usually I used to give them like passages like the Obama passage, and then I would watch the Obama speech and try to get them to emulate Obama, and then they never would, especially when their kids are young. Or I would give them like interesting passages and see like how they would interpret it, how they would express themselves. But once again, with the younger kids, it's harder to do. What I ended up resorting to is like I tried to focus, like with the young kids, I tried to focus the class more on the writing section actually. So every single day I would give them some time to work on the essays themselves. Like I would ask them to bring their computers, and I would go around and I'd look at their things and I'd suggest things to add. So like for example, like one kid in my class last week, he wrote something about endangered animal species. And the first time I looked at like his first paragraph, it was just like, animal species are dying by the thousands. This is because of humans. Humans are killing many animals. You know, like, it's kind of a basic thing, but I was like, hey, maybe you can go online and look at like the numbers of endangered species. So I would make him go on Wikipedia and he would look for those things and he'd stick them in their speech. And then, or I'd be like, oh, maybe you can give me an example of an animal that had like a non-native species invaded the native species. And then he'd go online and find an example and he would stick it in his speech. So like a lot of it has, especially with the little kid, has focused around like the writing section actually, which is ironic because it's not a writing class. But then the other thing is, so like the last day, and this is when I made my revelation of how to teach little kids. I made them do the speech once, but then like as always, like it was kind of like monogamous and like uninteresting. or like at least technically not very good because he wouldn't look up and things like that. And I would go up to them and I'd be like, okay, I want, while that kid is reviewing his first paragraph, I stand in front of this kid and make him say, you're going to read me this paragraph. And he would try his best to read his exact paragraph. If I didn't like him, I'd make him read it again. Or I'd be like, oh, you have to talk louder, you have to like talk softer and things like that. And then so like little kids, like once again, like the philosophy and the expectations are a little different from the older kids, but like, you know, yeah. Are there any more questions? I kind of got off topic. I remember this started as a college admissions thing, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Do you know Kevin Lay? And if
Yes.
you do, what do you think and why?
I think Kevin Lay is very cool. So he teaches Java here, right? He teaches several computer. Yeah. So
yeah, you know Kevin Lay, you can go to the Yelp. Go to Yelp and search Springlight Education.
Yeah, he has
and
like
you can find 2 students wrote a comment for Kevin Lay and one Kevin Lay, awesome Kevin Lay.
So I mean, so Kevin Lay is a very interesting kid. So he is attending Oxford University, which is very impressive because it's very difficult for American students to get into English schools because they have different secondary school standards. Okay, in my opinion, Kevin is probably, in terms of his like mental capacity, the smartest person I have ever met. And like that transcends like Johnny Ho and things like that. And his biggest flaw though is that when it comes to his schoolwork, maybe he's so smart that he doesn't have to care, but like he never, there's a joke that we tell about him that Kevin Lay is a myth because we never see him in class. So like, wow, like Kevin Lay, like what is this? It's like seeing Bigfoot, or it's like seeing like a UFO or something like that, you know? So like, that would be his biggest flaw. But at the same time, he's remarkably smart, and at the same time, he has like a lot of like humility, and like he's not like cocky or modest. He's like doesn't judge you quickly. He makes friends with a lot of people, and he's generous. There was a story about apparently like someone was telling me how he makes so much money, and how like one time like the FBLA team, or Future Business Leaders of America team, all went out to like they had like a big pizza party or something, and they ordered pizza, and then so Kevin was the guy to pay for it, but then like everyone was expecting to pay him back. And when they tried to pay him back, he's like, don't even worry about it. Like $100 bill, not even a problem. No. So like kind of tells you a little bit about his character. Like he's kind of like easygoing, but at the same time he's very, very intelligent. Yeah. I don't know him that well, but like, you know, he's a cool guy.
Yeah, Kevin teaches a Java class and AMC class here. And every case, his student learn from him and say, only Kevin. We don't want any other teacher, only Kevin.
Kevin's pretty cool. Yeah.
Where's Kevin going next year?
Oxford.
Oh, so he won't be here teaching
yes.
anymore, huh?
Oh, he will go to Oxford in October. Yeah, so he will teach to September.
In England?
Yes, England. Not Oxford, Georgia. There's a joke. If you guys have read The Great Gatsby, there's a city in Georgia also called Oxford. There's an Oxford University there. And the joke is in The Great Gatsby, which is a novel, that the main character went to Oxford, and then it turns out it's Oxford, Georgia. It's not Oxford, England, but like, yes. He is going to Oxford, England. Yes. All right, any last questions? Yeah. All right, sure.
Thanks.
Sure.
And also give your mom
send the email.
Sure. It's in the afternoon. Class is in the morning.